Hey guys, tonight we journey into the unwashed, perfumed, and paradoxically pristine-smelling world of royal women's hygiene through history. Picture this: you're walking down a candlelit corridor in Versailles, past gilt-framed mirrors and tapestries whispering with dust. Your slippers glide silently over polished parquet floors, but the scent that hits you is anything but silent. Beneath layers of rosewater ambergris and crushed violet powder, there's a musty tang of scalp, sweat, mildew, and something that smells suspiciously like old cheese. You're not in a horror movie. You're standing behind the Queen's toilet chair, where every morning begins with the ritual of pretending to be clean. And you probably won't survive this nose-first plunge into beauty and filth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're suffering this alongside me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the late 1600s France in full bloom. Versailles is a floral fever dream wrapped in gold leaf. But beneath its powdered facade, the Sun King's court is crawling literally with secrets. Ladies float down the halls in gowns that weigh more than your average sixth grader silk, trailing behind them like fog. Their faces are marble masks, powdered white with arsenic-rich Venetian ceruse. But it's their hair, oh their hair, that steals the show. Hair isn't just hair anymore. It's a tower of pride, gossip, and hidden horrors. Wigs reach ridiculous heights, stacked with wire cages and hair from horses' servants, or if you're a high-ranking duchess, your own dead child's locks. Morbid, but fashionable. These towering confections are sculpted over days, sometimes weeks, and once they're up, they stay up. For how long? Until they fall apart from rot, or are attacked by lice, moths, or worse. You wince as you watch a handmaid gently swat at a countess's scalp, lifting a flap of curls to reveal a nest of lice as busy as a royal kitchen. Powdered wigs might look divine, but underneath it's a hotbed of filth. Head scratching isn't just a nervous tick, it's necessary maintenance. And when the scratching becomes too much, a silver pick called a head scratcher, no joke, is slipped in under the wig to chase the crawling agony around. Historians still argue whether the vermin truly lived in the wigs or just the scalps beneath. But let's be honest, you're seeing both in action. Some women try to stave off infestations with scented oils, lavender rose, even cedar tar. But more often than not, it just gives the lice a sweet-smelling buffet. And don't think they were washing these things. Real wigs were never dipped in water. That would ruin the starching, melt the pomades, and unravel the hours of work. Instead, they were brushed, repowdered, and sometimes left out overnight to air, often on stands shaped like heads. Imagine walking into your mother's salon and finding 15 ghostly, decapitated heads staring back at you. The most elite women used something called pomatum to slick their real hair underneath the wigs, a grease made from bear fat and scented with crushed rose petals. Bear fat. So now you've got a layer of souring animal lard marinating all day under a 10-pound hair sculpture. Cozy. Oh, and sometimes these wig masterpieces weren't just visual. The poof style could include miniature ships, bird cages with live birds, or elaborate scenes made from wax and fabric. Which is fine until the candlelight catches one or the birds, contribute to the theme. There are rumors that ladies' wigs attracted rodents at night, nibbling away at the remnants of pomade. Are these tales exaggerated, maybe? But the presence of vermin in court chambers is very real. The kitchens couldn't keep them out. Why would wigs be safe? At court balls, the smell of human bodies packed into a gilded furnace builds fast. You sway with the dancers, But your eyes water because even though everyone's doused in perfume, the sweat still leaks through. Powder sticks to damp skin, forming clumps and streaks like melting fondant. The heat rises under the wigs until you feel your scalp peeling. Still, removing the hairpiece in public would be an unforgivable faux pas. Better to faint. And they did faint. Frequently. Not just from corsets, but from dehydration, overheating, and sheer olfactory overload. You notice the subtle presence of salts, ammonia crystals in little silk sachets waved under noses to revive the collapsing elite. Fainting becomes almost performative. Here's your fun fringe tidbit. Some elite ladies developed a coded wig language. The direction of the tilt, the color of the feathers, the presence of a black lace patch. Each element whispered private messages. A left-tilted wig might signal romantic availability. Red feathers meant political allegiance. In a way, their hairstyles were proto-Twitter layered with context and flirtation. So next time you imagine a noble woman smiling beneath a chandelier, think of the headaches from her 14-inch wig, the itching scalp, the warm grease seeping down her temples, the humming fear of lice. Yet she still smiles, raises her perfumed hand, and bows just slightly so her neck doesn't snap under the weight of fashion. She's not alone. This is daily life at Versailles, and it's only the beginning. Remember that head scratcher, you're going to want to keep it close. You haven't even recovered from the head lice opera when you catch a whiff of something stronger, less floral, more fermented foot. You follow the smell, half curious, half fearful, and find yourself in a royal dressing room where bathwater isn't just rare, it's almost taboo. It's easy to assume that royalty, with all their wealth and silk robes, would bathe constantly in marble tubs of rosewater and milk. But you're in the 16th century now, and the belief at court is terrifyingly simple: water makes you sick. No, really. The dominant theory is that bathing, especially hot baths, opens the skin's pores, allowing miasmas or bad airs to creep in and rot you from the inside. So instead of washing, you learn to layer. You stand beside a duchess of the Valois court who hasn't bathed fully in 2 months. She does, however, clean herself daily by changing her chemise, that's the long undergown closest to the skin, and dusting her body with scented powder. That's Hygiene Renaissance style. And you're not judging, but you're definitely holding your breath. Some women use dry cloths to rub the skin, called dry bathing, or they soak the cloths in alcohol and dab rather than scrub. The truly fastidious might dip a linen rag in rose vinegar and gently wipe around the neck, under the arms, and between the toes. But a full soak in water only for the ill, the eccentric, or the politically expendable. One Queen Isabella of Castile famously bragged that she had only bathed twice in her entire life, once when she was born, and once when she got married. You can't help but wonder what the wedding night smelled like. Spoiler, not lavender. Even the most powerful women wore layers upon layers of fabric, trapping heat, sweat, and dust against the body. There's an undeniable scent in the air, a courtly funk, if you will, that no amount of perfume quite covers. You watch as a noblewoman spritzes her underarms with a mixture of orange blossom and civet, the latter being a musky oil extracted from the glands of a wild cat. Royal women dab this behind their ears, between their breasts, and yes, at the groin. It's less about smelling good and more about smelling better than the person next to you. You also notice something odd: gloves. Not just one pair, but many. Scented gloves were all the rage, soaked in oils, stuffed with herbs, and worn until the fingers nearly disintegrated. Ladies used them as a mobile form of deodorant and barrier, warding off whatever germs or smells they imagined were floating through the air. In fact, many noblewomen slept in them, waking up with dry, perfumed hands, even if the rest of their body was quietly decaying beneath a brocade nightgown. And then there's the weird stuff. One fringe practice involved sewing sachets of rosemary cloves and marjoram into undergarments. These were called scent guardians, and they doubled as both potpourri and pest repellent. You find one that's gone a bit wrong now, moldy. It emits a scent best described as swamp with ambition. You start to itch. Not from lice this time, but just the idea of it all. Imagine trying to maintain composure during a 6-hour banquet, your chemise soaked with sweat, your corset digging in, and a rotting civet pouch sewn into your waistband. Every gesture is practiced, every smile weighed, yet you know your armpits haven't seen water since the last solar eclipse. And what about the water they do use? Well, it isn't clean. Even in palaces, the water supply is questionable. Rivers double as sewers. Rainwater collected in barrels turns brackish. Some queens had private wells or imported spring water for hand washing, but that was the exception, not the rule. Bathing in it, that's a gamble with dysentery. Historians still argue whether the general aversion to bathing was exaggerated by later writers mocking the past, but diary entries, medical manuals, and travel journals back it up. One French physician warned that bathing weakens the flesh and invites foul humors. Better to perfume and pray. Speaking of prayer, did you know some royal women believed cleanliness could actually anger God? In certain periods, visible vanity like spending hours on grooming was considered spiritually risky. One 15th century queen refused to wash her feet more than once per season, insisting that humility required discomfort. That's piety royal style. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In 17th century Italy, some noblewomen bathed only with gloves on to avoid touching their own flesh. They'd sit in warm, aromatic water, chamomile or mint if they were fancy, but keep their hands gloved, claiming it preserved modesty and deterred lustful thoughts. You chuckle at the idea of being modest while naked in a marble tub. Even on special occasions, bathing was more symbolic than sanitary. A royal bride might be doused in perfumed water before the wedding, a ritual called the bridal purification, but she was rarely scrubbed. The water was poured over her shoulders, often by her maids, while prayers were whispered for fertility and purity. It was more of a holy sprinkle than an actual wash. You begin to notice a pattern for royal women. Hygiene wasn't about health. It was about symbolism. Smell was social currency, not medical necessity. Clean was whatever passed as court acceptable. If your perfume choked the air before your BO, did you were considered presentable. And when someone finally did bathe, it was an ordeal. Heating enough water for a full-body soak took hours. Servants hauled buckets from the kitchens, steaming and sloshing. The tub, often a heavy copper basin, had to be dragged into the bedchamber. Bathing was never private. At least 2 maids stood by to scrub pour and occasionally gossip. So tonight, as you lie back and imagine silk sheets, don't forget what lies underneath them. The perfume, the powdered skin, the chemises steeped in old sweat, and the quiet pride of a duchess who hasn't touched soap in 4 weeks, but still insists you kiss her hand. And you do. Because what else can you do in the presence of royalty? You're barely past the stench of dry bathing duchesses when you hear a rustle of skirts and a soft, strained sigh. You've entered the private chambers of a Tudor princess, early morning, the hearth still smoldering, the floorboards cold. She sits perched on the edge of her canopied bed, layers of linen tangled around her ankles, her face pale but composed. Her ladies-in-waiting hover with anxious efficiency. Why? Because today is not just a day, it's that time of the month. You tread softly, but your curiosity is loud. How exactly did royal women deal with menstruation before modern pads, tampons, or helpful YouTube explainers? The short answer, with secrecy, suffering, and a whole lot of heavy fabric. Take the Tudor court, famously paranoid, politically charged, and obsessed with reproduction. Every cramp, every late cycle, every unexpected bloodstain had political weight. Queens weren't just women, they were fertility machines. If they bled, they were fertile. If they didn't, they were accused of witchcraft heresy, or worse, infertility. The stakes were uterus deep. So what did royal women do during their periods? Mostly pretend they weren't having them. Modesty, you learn, was everything. Even the term menstruation was rarely used. Instead, phrases like the flowers or the monthly purge floated through hushed corridors. Some simply called it unwell. You peek through a curtain and watch as a handmaid slides a folded linen rag, soft but unmistakably stained, into a shallow ceramic bowl, glancing over her shoulder as if she's committing a crime. Back then, menstrual cloths were the standard. These weren't fancy, just strips of linen folded and placed inside the undergarments. Sometimes they were tied around the waist with belts called sanitary belts, or held in place with cloth harnesses. And they weren't disposable. After use, they were rinsed discreetly and hung to dry where no man would see. You imagine the poor laundress tasked with soaking these out in freezing well water, trying not to gag as the chill bites through her fingertips. And don't assume these cloths worked well. They shifted, they leaked, they smelled. You glance at the floor and notice faint rust-colored stains in the rushes. No one mentions them. They simply throw more herbs into the straw and move on. Now here's where things get a little more complicated. Because menstruation wasn't just a private inconvenience, it was also a public suspicion. Royal women, especially queens, were under constant scrutiny. Every missed period triggered gossip. Was she pregnant or barren or worse? Was she bleeding too much, suggesting disease or excess of humors? You can almost hear the whispers swirling behind every tapestry. In one particularly grim case, Anne Boleyn's rumored failure to produce a male heir was tied by her enemies to unnatural menstruation. Some even accused her of having a devil's mark, a grotesque superstition linking menstruation to demonic influence. Historians still argue whether such accusations were politically motivated or born from genuine fear. Either way, the outcome wasn't pretty. Spoiler, she was beheaded. But not for her period. Probably. Here's a fun fringe tidbit to lighten the mood. In some European courts, it was believed that menstrual blood could kill bees, sour wine, or rust iron. One 16th century medical text warned that a menstruating woman should not walk through a vineyard or handle meat lest she ruin it. Imagine being told you were unfit to touch fruit because your uterus was doing its job. Of course, some women sought comfort from these monthly agonies. Herbal teas, mugwort rue, or pennyroyal were common remedies, though some of these were also used as abortifacients. Royal women didn't always have the luxury of privacy when seeking relief. You watch as a Spanish princess chews quietly on a cinnamon stick. Her hands clenched in her lap, pretending nothing's wrong while a courtier drones on about naval strategy. Let's not forget the clothing. You think corsets were torture on a normal day. Try strapping into one while bleeding, bloated, and cramping. Women would often loosen their stays during menstruation, though not so much that anyone could tell. Everything had to appear normal, even if your uterus felt like it was trying to punch its way out. You walk slowly now, stepping over discarded petticoats and small bundles of cloth that have clearly been used and tucked aside. The air smells of sweat, rosewater, and iron. It's not grotesque, it's just human. But in the royal court, being human was always a liability. There were also rules, so many rules. Some medical advisors warned against sexual activity during menstruation. Others recommended it as a way to balance the humors. One French queen was whispered, to have insisted her lovers wait 3 days after her period ended, not for cleanliness, but to time conception with divine numerology. It didn't work. She had 17 miscarriages and was eventually declared cursed. One of the more bizarre beliefs that menstrual blood was powerful spiritually and magically. Some queens were rumored to save their cloths and bury them beneath sacred trees, or mix the blood into love charms. We'll never know how true those rumors were, but you do find a small, scorched linen square hidden inside a cedar box under one bed. The stain pattern looks deliberate, almost like a symbol. You leave it alone, and all the while men at court remain blissfully ignorant or pretend to be. Royal husbands often expected their wives to remain sexually and socially available regardless of discomfort. Some arranged for rest days, where the queen would retreat to a private chamber for the duration of her cycle, surrounded by female attendants and books. But others demanded appearances no matter how pale or pained their bride looked. So tonight, you lie beside a queen who smiles through it all, her cramps, her discomfort, her dread of what the court will say if she bleeds too much or too little. She is beauty and power wrapped in velvet and lace. But beneath it all, she is raw biology ignored by etiquette and barely managed by medicine. And you start to understand something simple and ancient: royal women bled in silence. Because history was never written from between the legs. You slip quietly into a cold, candlelit chamber where the scent has changed less musk, more something sour-sweet like rotting fruit trapped in a gilded candy dish. The room belongs to a young archduchess, and though she smiles demurely through yellowed teeth, your own lips curl on instinct. Welcome to the royal mouth. It's the 15th century, and you're about to experience a dental journey that could double as medieval horror. Nobility, despite having access to the best food and the finest luxury, suffer terribly from what's inside their mouths. And unlike their secretive hygiene habits, this particular flaw is right there front and center whenever they speak, laugh, or smile. You sit across from a teenage Habsburg bride shipped off from Vienna to Spain as part of a diplomatic match. She's lovely at first glance, pale, perfumed, wearing brocade so heavy it creaks when she shifts. But then she opens her mouth to speak and, oh dear, her breath hits you like a brick wall soaked in vinegar and old garlic. Here's the not-so-fun fact. Sugar is a luxury, good, rare, and prestigious, so of course royal families gorge on it. Candied oranges, preserved dates, marzipan sculptures, sugar-dusted rose petals, and syruped plums are eaten like status symbols. A blackened tooth is practically a brag. One Venetian noblewoman allegedly painted a tooth dark just to appear wealthier. You stare in quiet awe at the decadence and the decay. And brushing. Not exactly what you're imagining. The wealthy used toothpicks, silver or ivory if you're fancy, and chew sticks often made of licorice root or soft wood gnawed to fibers at one end. A dab of honey and crushed salt might be added to the mix. But toothbrushes as we know them weren't widely used in Europe until the 17th century, and even then they were rare. Instead, teeth were rubbed with linen rags and wiped with ash salt or even burnt bread. You watch as a royal lady-in-waiting mixes a dental paste for her mistress, charcoal wine-powdered eggshells, and a dash of vinegar. She applies it to a rag and gently scrubs at the princess's front teeth, which don't so much gleam as glare with a damp, grayish tinge. Her gums are inflamed. One tooth wiggles when pressure's applied. No one speaks of it. And yet the royal women are expected to maintain perfect smiles, not for health, but for politics. Marriage negotiations are especially cruel. You're present during a courtly inspection of a prospective bride by an ambassador, and the first thing he checks after her dowry is her mouth. If her teeth are straight and white, or at least attached, it's a good omen. If they're blackened or falling out, Suddenly, she's not so politically fertile. Some monarchs went to disturbing lengths to hide this. Catherine de' Medici, plagued by toothaches and abscesses, had her portraits retouched to remove the swelling. Historians still argue whether she actually had all her molars pulled by 30, or whether that was an exaggeration spread by her enemies. Either way, in real life, she rarely smiled. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen herself, had such a sweet tooth that her dental decay was legendary. Foreign visitors commented that her speech was nearly unintelligible late in life due to missing teeth and chronic pain, and yet her courtiers insisted she smelled of violets. You picture her layered in pearls, breathing violets, and decay in equal measure, delivering royal proclamations through clenched gums. Some queens resorted to mouth perfumes, tiny cloth balls soaked in mint rosemary, or clove oil held between cheek and gum. These were called mouth sweeteners, and while they helped a little, they also caused ulcers. One French princess is said to have fainted during Mass because her mouth freshener had soaked up so much clove oil it poisoned her bloodstream. And when pain struck, as it often did, it wasn't quietly endured. You listen from a velvet armchair as a royal woman shrieks behind a silk screen, her tooth being pulled without anesthetic. The barber surgeon braces a foot on the chair, yanks with a rusty iron hook, and mutters a prayer when the tooth finally comes free, root dangling, blood streaming. There's no disinfectant, just strong wine and a sponge. Later that night, the same woman is expected to host a banquet. She greets guests with a shallow smile and a tightly tied veil to hide her swelling. The court plays along. Pretending is its own kind of hygiene. Now you may wonder, didn't any royal women have good teeth? Occasionally, yes. Some noble women chewed on fennel seeds after meals or rinsed their mouths with wine or vinegar. A few were obsessive about rinsing with salt water, which did help. But these were rare habits, and even rarer were the women who could maintain them through pregnancy, after pregnancy, endless sweets, and total absence of proper dentistry. Dental hygiene wasn't just a health issue, it was an economic one. You spot a servant girl polishing her mistress's ivory toothpick while gnawing on her own stick of birchwood. Her teeth, though not perfect, are better off. Why? Because she can't afford sugar. Ironically, the poorer classes, often chewing on coarse bread roots and salt pork, had fewer cavities. Still, when noble women lost teeth, and they did, often the solutions were creative. Some wore ivory dentures. Others inserted carved wood or bone as placeholders. These often smelled horrific, absorbed moisture, and warped in the mouth. You watch a young noblewoman slip in a thin rosewood molar during a dinner party and try not to gag when she coughs mid-laugh and spits it into her wine. Let's not even start on bad breath. Actually, no, let's. Because halitosis was rampant and often viewed as a character flaw. If a royal lady's breath offended, she might be called corrupted, her virtue in question. So they chewed cloves, cardamom, or candied ginger. Some kept silver tongue scrapers. One particularly paranoid duchess carried a pouch of dragon's blood, a red resin burned in a bowl to purify the mouth. And yet, with all this effort, all the ash and honey and agony, dental pain remained a fact of life. You lean closer to a portrait of a 16th century empress, her lips tight, her eyes strained. She looks regal. But you know the truth now. Behind that mouth lies rot, infection, and a daily dose of clove-soaked linen stuffed between aching gums. So tonight, when you brush your teeth with your minty plastic miracle, remember, centuries of queens would have traded kingdoms for what you take for granted. And maybe, just maybe, send up a sleepy thank you to whoever invented toothpaste. You've had enough of the tooth decay symphony, but your journey doesn't get sweeter. It only gets muskier. You find yourself inside a sprawling royal boudoir, every surface buried beneath crystal flacons, cut glass bottles, velvet sachets, and beeswax-sealed jars. You're not in a perfumery. You're in a royal woman's attempt to smell slightly less like what she's secretly marinating in sweat-lard mildew and centuries of unwashed lace. Royal perfume isn't just fragrance, it's full-on warfare. An olfactory arms race where noble women drown themselves in aromatic concoctions, designed less to attract and more to deflect. You watch as a duchess, perched on her upholstered stool, lifts her arms and winces not from modesty, but because her chemise is soaked with 5-day-old sweat, sealed in by whalebone corsetry. Her maid responds by puffing orris root powder into the folds of her underarms, followed by a few spritzes of ambergris water. Yes, that's the waxy intestinal secretion of sperm whales. It's the Chanel No. 5 of the 17th century. This isn't indulgent, it's survival. You lean closer to one of her many ornate perfume bottles and catch the scent, a musky rose overlaid with hints of myrrh, frankincense, a whiff of civet and something leathery, possibly castoreum from beavers. Yes, they're anal glands again. Welcome to high society. Perfume isn't spritzed lightly on pulse points. It's massaged into hair, dabbed behind the ears, soaked into gloves, and even applied to petticoats. Some royal women kept small wax balls of scent called pomanders, tucked into their cleavage under their skirts, or hanging from their belts in tiny gilded cages. These clink like bells when they walk softly, announcing, "This princess does not bathe, but she does believe in distraction." And don't forget scented fans. Waved gently in church or court, they scatter perfume across the air like a fog machine. One royal fan you note is treated with crushed violet petals, citrus oil, and deer musk. It smells divine until it mixes with the room's actual scent, a stew of body heat, dog fur, human oil, and damp velvet. You glance toward the walls. Perfumed wallpaper. The royal palace, ever aware of its own olfactory failings, sometimes lines chambers with scented paper infused with herbs like lavender mint and verbena. Of course, it doesn't help much when the chamber pot's only 10 feet away behind a curtain. Here's tonight's quirky tidbit. Louis XIV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, reportedly commissioned a perfume known as Glory of the Night, a blend of tuberose ambergris and rosewater, meant to evoke innocence and seduction. She used it not just on her skin, but to scent her letters. You imagine the king receiving one of these folded parchment missives and sniffing it like it's the finest pâté. Historians still argue whether royal perfume used masked poor hygiene or encouraged it. Did women bathe less because they had access to scent? Or did the relentless stench of court life simply demand more drastic countermeasures? Either way, the result is clear. Perfume is no longer just a beauty product. It's armor. You trail behind an English princess preparing for a banquet. Her routine includes wiping her underarms with eau de cologne-soaked cloths, dabbing musk along her jawline, placing a rosemary-scented ribbon in her hair, and sprinkling violet powder into her stockings. All this before she's even laced her corset. Her maid grumbles about the cost of keeping up appearances. A single dram of civet could cost more than a servant's monthly wage. Speaking of which, you peek into the servants' quarters and find another truth. Many of these noble perfumes are produced by apothecaries who use spoiled ingredients. One batch of rose attar is diluted with rancid fat. Another vial of musk turns sour in the heat. Some unscrupulous perfumers stretch ambergris with cow bile. The result, a scent profile best described as barnyard with ambition. But the royals never know, or pretend not to. You follow the princess to the banquet hall, where every woman is a nose-blind oracle. The air is thick with overlapping perfumes, jasmine and sandalwood, and myrtle all clashing like rival duchesses. Heads turn not from beauty, but from olfactory confusion. Who smells like lilies? Who smells like funerary incense? And what's that lingering note of horse scent becomes status? Certain blends are reserved only for the elite. You overhear one noblewoman boast that her personal perfume contains Persian musk, Moorish civet, and 3 drops of the Sultan's own blend. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that someone else doesn't have it. And then there are the perfumed gloves. Imported from Spain and France, these gloves are steeped in scented oils for weeks, then powdered with aromatic resins. You slide your hands into a pair and instantly feel it, the heavy oil, the pungent trace of lavender, clove, and tallow. Ladies wore these gloves everywhere, especially while greeting guests. One duchess kisses another's glove, not her hand, because skin-to-skin contact would mean brushing actual sweat. But even this ritual has risks. In one famous scandal, a pair of perfumed gloves was poisoned, scented with arsenic and belladonna, leading to a quiet, stylish death. Was it political, romantic, petty? No one knows. But after that, many royal women kept their gloves under lock and key. Perfume once again becomes both shield and sword. By now, your nose is overwhelmed. You can barely smell your own thoughts. Everything is flowers and fur and fermented citrus. The room pulses with aroma like a hallucinatory dream made of soap bubbles and goat hair. And yet, for the women here, this is normal. This is the only way to exist in a world where hygiene is feared, but appearances must remain divine. And perhaps that's the most royal scent of all the faint, powdery trace of denial. The banquet is over. Perfumed gloves lie crumpled on chairs, powdered wigs droop slightly with sweat, and the scent of melting tallow mingles with roast pheasant in the still, breathless air. But the night isn't done. You tiptoe through hushed corridors toward a part of the palace. Few visitors are ever allowed to enter the private sleeping chambers. There, beyond carved doors and velvet drapes, lies one of the dirtiest secrets of all, where how and with what royal women relieved themselves. You expected ornate toilets, perhaps a marble basin carved with cherubs, or a golden seat hidden behind silk. What you find is far less regal and far more human. You watch as a countess excuses herself from a game of cards. She doesn't leave the room. Instead, she glides behind a folding screen decorated with pastoral scenes and lowers herself onto what looks like an elegant high-backed armchair with a hole cut in the seat. A maid holds a candle aloft, while another steadies the chamber pot beneath. You barely blink before it's over. The countess emerges powdered and proud, as though she'd merely adjusted her petticoats. This is the close stool, a royal staple. Padded, carved, often with brocade upholstery, it's designed to preserve dignity while doing what no noble woman dares speak of. Chamber pots aren't optional, they're essential. And they're everywhere. Under beds, inside cupboards, beside dressing tables. Some are porcelain, painted with flowers. Others are plain pewter or copper, dulled by use. But they all serve the same purpose: containment. The real surprise, they weren't always private. You hear whispers about the groom of the stool, a real trusted position in the royal household. For queens and noblewomen, the female equivalent existed in the form of the chamberer, or lady of the bedchamber. These attendants didn't just fetch combs and corsets. They also managed urinals, emptied pots, wiped, cleaned, and discreetly burned soiled linens. Being close to a royal bottom wasn't humiliating, it was political intimacy. Some attendants wielded enormous influence, simply because they were the only ones present during the queen's most vulnerable moments. One particularly stoic chambermaid, you observe, wipes down a silver pot with a vinegar-soaked cloth, then carries it away without a word. She'll dump the contents in the courtyard ditch behind the kitchens, known not so affectionately as the night river. Some castles had rudimentary plumbing, long vertical shafts carved into the walls leading to cesspits below. But most of the time, you went in a pot. Then a servant hauled your dignity away. You cringe a bit as you pass by a sleeping duchess's bedside and catch the sour tang of stale urine wafting from a half-filled bowl tucked beneath a stool. The room is perfumed, yes, but it's like spraying roses over a compost pile. The illusion is thin. Here's your quirky fringe detail of the night. Some noblewomen used bordeleus, delicately crafted chamber pots, shaped like gravy boats, specifically designed to be used while standing or squatting in public. Yes, truly. You watch as a lady slips hers under her skirts during a long church sermon. Her maid holds up a shawl to shield the deed. Moments later, she hands the filled porcelain vessel to the maid with the same grace she'd offer a prayer book, and forget flushing. The concept of running water toilets wouldn't reach widespread use until the 19th century. In these eras, once the pot was full, it was someone's job to empty it. Sometimes that someone didn't make it in time. In winter, contents froze in place. In summer, they soured faster than fish in the sun. A careless knock of the elbow in the dark. You don't want to imagine it. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a night bottle, a tall ceramic jug used specifically for urine. It's been painted with roses, as if that helps. Royal women would urinate into these in the dead of night, too tired or too cold to find a chamber pot. The bottle's wide neck accommodates layers of skirt and petticoat. Spillage was frequent. Mattresses, you realize with growing horror, were often layered with waxed linen to catch accidents. And the smell, it doesn't go away. Palaces, despite their grandeur, had poor ventilation. Rushes were scattered across stone floors and strewn with dried herbs like thyme, mint, and marjoram to cover the stench. They absorbed everything sweat, blood, chamber pot splashes, and were rarely changed. You once again find yourself breathing through your sleeve. Historians still argue whether royal women preferred this semi-public toileting because of cultural norms or because of sheer architectural inconvenience. Some say it was modesty by design, a way to remain within the inner sanctum of the household, without the indignity of wandering too far. Others argue it reflects a total lack of privacy in the lives of the powerful. And for those who were sick or pregnant, things got even worse. You sit beside a queen recovering from childbirth. Her lying-in chamber is sealed, darkened, warm, and foul. The chamber pot is emptied less often, the linens stained and reused. The air hangs heavy, rank with blood, sweat, and the sourness of confinement. The queen doesn't complain. She can't. Complaining is unseemly. So she breathes through a pomander and murmurs thanks when her maid wipes her thighs clean with a lavender-soaked cloth. Not all noblewomen accepted this as fate. One Bavarian duchess had a gold-trimmed commode chair specially designed with a perfume box built into the backrest. Another French marquise commissioned a rose-scented chamber pot lined with silk, which it turns out was not a good idea. Fabric doesn't hold up well under those conditions. These were rare indulgences. Most royal women endured their biology with the same stoic grace they applied to childbirth and corsets. And then there were the inevitable accidents. During balls, long journeys, or coronations, when holding it simply wasn't an option, garments were designed for speed. Slits in petticoats, detachable skirts, even open crotch underdrawers, which later came back into fashion, ironically, these all allowed for the quickest possible relief. You suddenly realize that entire tailoring innovations were born from the simple, urgent fact that queens had bladders. By now the palace is dark and still. You walk past rows of beds where noblewomen sleep, each with a chamber pot or bordeloo nearby ready for the inevitable. You look at their calm faces powdered white and still beneath silk veils, and understand something deeper than elegance. The reality of being royal is constant performance, and nowhere is that truer than when your own body interrupts the act. So yes, they peed in pots behind curtains while servants stood by. Yes, they disguised the smell with rose oil and rosemary. But beneath it all, they were human. And no perfume can fully mask that. It's morning again, and the sun is slicing through the high mullioned windows like a divine blade falling upon curls of powder drifting lazily in the air. You walk into a dressing chamber, velvet curtains drawn back just enough to reveal the battlefield, combs, brushes, pins, pomades, and at least 3 frightened-looking maids holding various instruments of hair-related warfare. You've arrived in the hour of the wig. Today's royal woman isn't just getting dressed, she's being constructed. A towering wig, heavy enough to cause tension headaches, sits like a sleeping beast on a padded stand. And now it's time to wrestle it into place. First, the scalp preparation. You wince as the maid dabs a thick, greasy salve across the Duchess's scalp, a mix of bear fat, lard, and beeswax, sometimes spiked with crushed rose petals, lavender, or powdered clove. It's called pomatum, and it's essential not just for scent and sheen, but for molding the hair flat enough to anchor the towering wig. Unfortunately, it also makes for an excellent breeding ground for lice. The Duchess's face is placid, but her fingers are white-knuckled on the armrests. She knows what's coming next, the scratching. Using a long silver pick, the maid delicately lifts and parts the Duchess's real hair, chasing down what they politely refer to as the little ones. And here's your scholarly pause. Historians still argue whether lice were more prevalent in the wigs themselves or in the natural hair beneath. Some suggest wigs helped manage infestations because they could be removed, cleaned, and powdered. Others insist the layers of powder fat and fabric only made the problem worse, creating a warm, unreachable haven for every parasite with ambition. You don't need the answer. You see it. A soft gasp, a wig lifted slightly, and there they are, lice and their pearly eggs glinting like cursed pearls. One scurries down the Duchess's neck, and she shivers but says nothing. A maid swiftly crushes it between fingernails and wipes her hand on a cloth. Business as usual. Wigs were necessary fashion statements. They signaled wealth, status, cleanliness, ironically enough, and also helped hide the ravages of disease. Smallpox scars, bald patches from syphilis, and thinning hair from mercury treatments. Yes, they did. That could all be concealed beneath a bouffant of silk-blended curls, and they weren't cheap. The finest wigs were made from human hair, sourced from servants, beggars, or corpses, and required hours of labor. Once constructed, they were set with wire cages and stiffened with starch, then powdered with tinted flower white for the elegant blue or pink, for the avant-garde lavender for mourning. You watch a footman stir a bowl of starch and violet dust, preparing to puff it through a sieve onto the Duchess's head. It settles gently like frost, until she sneezes violently and has to be redusted. Here's a quirky fringe fact to perfume the scene. Some women inserted dried flowers or orange peels into the wig's wire base, releasing tiny bursts of scent as they moved. Others braided ribbons soaked in vinegar through their own hair underneath, hoping to deter lice. These methods worked, sort of. Mostly they just added to the weight and complexity. Speaking of complexity, remember the poof hairstyle. This was no ordinary updo. Imagine a ship, literally. A model frigate, sails unfurled, perched on top of your head, secured with pins, wires, and Hairspray's 18th century ancestor tree resin. Or perhaps it's a garden scene. Miniature sheep made from wool, a wax shepherdess, artificial flowers, even a functioning birdcage with a live finch inside. You saw one of those last night, and you haven't emotionally recovered. Royal women couldn't always sit upright in carriages. Sometimes the wig was too tall. Some had to kneel during prayers. One princess arrived at a ball with her hair so wide she had to enter sideways through the door. Wig maintenance was no less absurd. At night, the piece was carefully removed, placed on its own stand. Some wore little wigs themselves to keep the shape, and powdered again. Between wearings, lice might be smoked out using burning herbs or dried citrus peels. You watch a maid place a wig inside a wooden box with smoldering rosemary and sage, a portable sauna for parasites. But what about real hair beneath the wig? Royal women's natural hair was usually braided tightly to the scalp. Washing it was rare, maybe once a month. When it was done, it involved herbal rinses, rosemary water vinegar, or even lye soap if the scalp could take it. Combing was painful. You see a maid use a comb with teeth like daggers scraping through the roots to remove eggs. The Duchess whimpers. No one acknowledges it. One French courtier described the process as scraping the orchard for pests. Poetic if you ignore the bleeding. And just because you had lice didn't mean you were dirty. In fact, lice were so common in court that they were almost considered a nuisance of status, like taxes. There were even louse combs made of gold inlaid with enamel, carried as if they were fashion accessories. You see one now glinting beside a box of hairpins shaped like crescent moons. It's beautiful and disgusting. You'd think with all this trouble, some noblewomen would just shave their heads. And they did, sort of. A popular practice involved cutting the natural hair close to the scalp to reduce heat lice and sweat. Then the wig could sit flatter. But shaving the entire head was risky. If you were seen bald, even in your private chamber, it was scandalous. Hair was still tied to femininity, purity, and power. Better to suffer than to expose. So now, with the wig finally mounted, the powder fluffed, and the oils dabbed behind the ears, the Duchess is ready to emerge. She smiles carefully, lest her hair tilt, and strides into the corridor, as if she's not wearing a parasite-infested monument on her head. You follow her, the scent of orris root trailing like a veil, and think this is not elegance. It's endurance. And tonight, when you finally lay your own head down on a clean pillow with your hair loose and lice-free, maybe spare a thought for every royal woman who went to bed praying her wig didn't attract rats in the night. Yes, that happened. But we'll get there. You awaken to a rustle of taffeta and a grunt muffled by satin. The chamber you're in is dim, the fire barely alive in the hearth, but the sounds of early morning dressing are already in full swing. The Duchess stands bare from the waist up, arms lifted like a supplicant, as two maids tug at something stiff-boned and deeply cruel, her corset. No, not just any corset. This is a full-boned, whalebone-reinforced, satin-wrapped instrument of status and silent suffering. The strings creak as they tighten. The Duchess exhales sharply, then doesn't breathe again for at least 15 seconds. Welcome to the world of aristocratic underpinnings, where fashion is survival and breathing is optional. You watch the maids work in tandem. One at the waist, yanking with rhythmic, practiced force. The other at the shoulders, smoothing fabric, muttering softly about posture. The Duchess's face goes from sleepy to pale in moments. Not because she's awake now, but because the blood's retreating from her skin. Her ribs are compressed, her organs shifting politely into the spaces left behind. Historians still debate whether corsets were as physically destructive as later Victorian literature suggests, or whether modern myth has exaggerated their effects. But you're watching in real time, and let's be honest, it looks horrifying. Beneath the corset, her chemise clings damply to her body. It's summer, and the air is thick even before the day begins. As the corset tightens, her skin flushes, then glistens. You see the telltale signs: heat rash just beneath the arms, raw, chafing along her ribs, the subtle shine of weeping skin at the small of her back. And this is just today's wear. These garments were rarely washed. Not because the Duchess was lazy, but because laundering them weakened the whalebone, damaged the stitching, and shortened their life. So instead, they were aired out. A quick spritz of rosewater or vinegar, a dusting of starch, and then back on. Imagine strapping into a sweaty sports bra that smells like last month's garden party, every day, for hours, and it doesn't end at the corset. You follow as the rest of the dressing ritual continues. Petticoats, overskirts, stomachers, side hoops, sleeves, a lace collar that requires pinning so delicate it could double as surgery. Every layer adds weight, heat, friction. You don't know how she's still standing. Now here's tonight's fringe tidbit to prevent sores from the rubbing corset edges. Some noble women wore thin strips of salted pork fat beneath the boning. Yes, bacon. Grease between the skin and whalebone prevented abrasion. But it also, you might guess, had its own fragrance after a long summer day, especially if not changed regularly, which it often wasn't. The result, a stinking, festering strip of salted meat slowly decomposing against royal flesh. You try not to gag, and what of the skin beneath all this? Starved of air, rubbed raw, often untreated. Royal women suffered from chronic back acne rashes, boils, and fungal infections. You spot the Duchess flinch as her maid brushes a powder-dusted cloth across her collarbone. She doesn't complain. That would be weak. Instead, she mutters something about the linen being rough. A code for, I'm bleeding under this gown, but let's keep moving. Corsets also dictated diet. A tightly laced stomach left no room for digestion. Meals had to be small, slow, and strategic. You remember last night's banquet, watching the Duchess pick at a fig while everyone else gorged on roast duck. Not from modesty, but from physics. One French marquise was so tightly laced during her wedding banquet that she fainted into the soup course. When revived with smelling salts, she reportedly whispered, "Tell the guests I'm not ill, just fashionable." And yet corsets weren't just torture. They were armor. In a court where beauty was power and posture could mean the difference between favor and disgrace, the corset wasn't optional, it was essential. Royal women learned to walk, dance, even ride on horseback in them. Some had multiple versions for different events: sitting corsets, riding corsets, ceremonial cinctures. One even had hidden pockets sewn into the boning for secret notes, or according to rumor, poison. But the longer you watch, the more you understand. This isn't about vanity, it's about control. In a world where royal women had almost no say over who they married, how many times they gave birth, or whether their bodies were publicly discussed, like breeding mares controlling their appearance, was the one thing they could cling to. And so they bore the sores, the rot, the heat and pain and fainting. They turned suffering into elegance. Of course, not all corsets were created equal. Some queens could afford custom tailoring, soft linings, even exotic fabrics from China or the Ottoman Empire. Others had to make do with stiffened canvas or patched stays inherited from older sisters. You find one such corset hanging near a peasant-born duchess's chamber. It smells faintly of mold and bay leaves. Her maid lifts it reverently despite the frayed laces and sweat-stained seams. Later, you catch a glimpse of a noblewoman at rest. Her corset has finally been loosened. She exhales deeply, the sound almost obscene in its relief. Her skin beneath is mottled, red-striped, and indented. You trace a finger over the whalebone ridges still imprinted hours later, and imagine wearing that cage every day from puberty to old age. Oh yes, girls were corseted young. Sometimes as early as age 5, they were trained to wear stays, the precursor to full corsets. It was less about fashion and more about training the spine, the posture, the behavior. By 12, they were expected to move gracefully in them. By 14, they were fully laced. One English princess wrote that her first corset gave her nightmares, dreams of drowning, of being buried alive. Her nurse responded by tightening it and telling her beauty requires silence. Tonight, as you lay your body out freely, limbs sprawled, ribs uncrushed, you can't help but marvel at their endurance. Not just the physical strength it took to wear these garments, but the emotional endurance to call it grace. Because tomorrow morning, the lace will be brushed, the corset will be cleaned with vinegar, the sores will be powdered, and she'll stand again. Straight-backed, silent, stunning, and still, stitched tight with wrought underneath. You wake before dawn in a Florentine villa, the walls damp with condensation and oil paint fumes, and a lady of the house already seated at her vanity. She peers into a polished silver mirror, holding her chin with the resignation of someone preparing for mild disfigurement. You take your place behind her shoulder, watching the ritual unfold with a strange mix of awe and dread. It's time for the face. You think you know makeup. You've seen contouring. You've seen influencers spend 45 minutes on one eyebrow. But you've never seen a royal woman slather white lead across her cheeks like she's frosting a poisoned cake. The Renaissance wasn't about less is more. It was about power disguised as purity. And nothing said power like porcelain skin that glowed even by candlelight and quietly killed you by 40. The face paint is called Venetian ceruse, a luxurious mixture of white lead and vinegar. It's smooth, it's opaque, and it's absolutely toxic. You watch the lady dip her hare's foot applicator into the jar and dab it carefully across her forehead, nose, and cheeks. The result is instantaneous blotches, freckles, rashes, all erased beneath a chalky mask of radiance. Of course, you can also see where yesterday's layer cracked. Her skin underneath is inflamed, papery, and threaded with fine red veins. A patch near her jaw is raw, flaking, oozing slightly. But still, the ceruse goes on. Because what choice does she have? Pale skin was not just fashionable. It was moral. It meant you didn't labor outdoors like a peasant. You were protected, pampered, untouched by the sun, and by implication by the world. Noble women were expected to appear as fragile and cold as marble statues. That was beauty. The price, slow poisoning, hair loss, tooth rot, lesions, infertility. But who's keeping track? Historians still argue whether every woman knew the dangers of lead-based makeup. Some believe they did, but the pressure to conform overruled common sense. Others insist the risks weren't understood until much later, when autopsies revealed the lead traces clinging to bones. Either way, you watch her continue silent and practiced brushing death across her face like it's blush. Next comes the rouge, a paste made of cinnabar mercury sulfide or sometimes crushed cochineal beetles. This too is toxic, but it gives her cheeks that perfect ethereal flush, the illusion of youth, innocence, and good health. Irony isn't just thick here, it's caked on in layers. She lines her lips with a mix of carmine and beeswax stained red like a crushed pomegranate. The color bleeds slightly where her skin is broken. No matter. She powders over it again. Now here's tonight's fringe tidbit to maintain a dewy look. Some women dabbed their faces with egg whites or snail slime. The egg dried into a stiff film, tightening the skin and giving it a ghostly sheen. Snail mucin, collected from crushed garden snails, was believed to soften skin and heal blemishes. You stare as a maid presents a bowl with something gelatinous at the bottom. You don't ask what it is. You already know. The finishing touch, vein painting. Using blue coal or finely ground azurite mixed with oil, noblewomen painted faint veins onto their breasts and temples. The effect skin so pale and translucent you could practically see the blood underneath. It was meant to mimic youth and virginity. Of course, if they'd actually exposed that skin to daylight, they might have combusted. The tools of this trade are meticulous. Brushes made of squirrel hair, mirrors polished from tin and mercury, mortars and pestles for grinding pearls into powder, small knives for trimming lashes. Yes, they trimmed them. Long lashes were a distraction. Controlled lashes were refinement. And the eyebrows, a battlefield. In the 14th century, it was fashionable to pluck them entirely and pencil in new ones higher on the forehead. A strange choice until you remember that large, unbroken foreheads were considered a mark of intelligence and nobility. One queen was rumored to have had her hairline burned back with a candle for a smoother look. Later, trends reversed this, and women began darkening their brows with soot or crushed ant eggs. You watch a maid lean in with a tiny iron rod slowly scraping a line of black above each brow. The lady holds perfectly still. One twitch could ruin everything. At this point, the face is done. It smells faintly of vinegar, sulfur, and roses. Beautiful, yes, but now frozen. She won't smile too widely or the lead will crack. She won't perspire or the powder will streak. She's a wax doll in a human dress, moving with careful elegance because anything more might cause her face to flake off in real time. But she isn't done. You follow her down a narrow hallway, past a mirror she deliberately avoids. She knows what she looks like. She also knows what's beneath it. The yellowed teeth, the missing eyebrows, the thinning hairline. The red ring of lead burns around her mouth. Those aren't to be seen. That's for her maid, or for God. And when the day ends, there's the matter of removal. No micellar water here. The face paint is scraped off with linen cloths soaked in rose water and almond oil. It takes time. It takes layers. And sometimes it takes skin. One particularly dreadful remedy involves mixing mercury with ground pearl to bleach out blemishes and restore glow. The result, fever, tremors, and in at least one recorded case, death. The court physician called it a misjudged cosmetic purge. You call it reckless skin care with a fatal twist. Still, these women weren't helpless victims of fashion. They were strategic. A flawless face could mean a political alliance, a better dowry, a seat closer to the queen. The makeup wasn't just vanity, it was armor. In a world where women couldn't vote, rule, or speak freely, their beauty became a language. And this white, brittle mask, it said, "I am untouchable. I am worth something." You return to the dressing chamber one last time, just as the silver jar of ceruse is being resealed. The maid's fingers are already flaking raw from contact. The lady's face glows faintly in the dim candlelight, an eerie, powdery glow that seems both sacred and sinister. She smiles. It's not joy, it's precision. And you understand this isn't makeup. It's a ritual sacrifice. One thin layer at a time. You wake to the scent of burning herbs and stale linens. A single candle flickers near the stone wall, casting long shadows over the canopied bed where the queen lies. She's 8 months pregnant, her body a tense balloon of exhaustion and rigid protocol, and the room her lying in chamber smells like confinement. Warm milk, dried lavender, and something faintly metallic that lingers in the air like a warning. This isn't a nursery. It's a battlefield. Pregnancy in royal history wasn't just a biological condition. It was a political event, a public obsession, a sacred duty. A queen's womb was the nation's cradle, and every kick cramp or delay could trigger court-wide panic or celebration. You sit at the edge of a carved walnut chair watching the queen grimace as her ladies-in-waiting adjust her position. She has not been allowed to leave this room in 2 weeks. This ritual, called lying in, required her to remain cloistered in semi-darkness until she gave birth. The windows are shuttered. The bedposts are draped in wool. Even the mirrors are covered. Bright light was thought to damage the child's eyes. Noise, laughter, sudden movements, too risky. This was an era where anything could cause a miscarriage, especially your emotions. Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted in genuine medical theories or cultural anxieties about female biology. Either way, you feel it now, the tension. The whole chamber holds its breath. A midwife enters quietly. She's older, weathered, and smells of cloves. She brings with her a bundle of rosemary and myrrh tied with ribbon and meant to ward off evil spirits. The queen has one clutched in each hand, one for luck, one for faith. Now here's your fringe tidbit of the night. In some parts of Europe, it was believed that nailing an iron key to the birthing room's door could prevent malevolent forces from stealing the child's soul. You glance at the door and see it there, dull, rusted, but still nailed firmly in place. No one questions it. But despite the incense and charms, the chamber is not clean. The bed has been used for 4 previous births, 2 successful, 1 stillborn, 1 miscarriage. The mattress sags in the middle. The stains have gone from red to brown to ghost. The sheets are boiled in vinegar and herbs, but the scent never really leaves. No one would dare mention it. This is a royal bed, sacred by title, stinking by truth. The queen herself is not washed. That won't happen until after the child is born, when the church declares her purified and allows her to re-enter public life. Until then, she is held somewhere between saint and prisoner. You note her shift is soaked at the underarms. The swelling, the heat, the layers, they don't stop even now. Her corset has been replaced with a looser girdle, but it still presses against her belly. She vomits into a bowl, which is quickly replaced and carried out by a maid who doesn't flinch. Vomiting is expected. So is bleeding. So is delirium. And in between the waves of pain, she must remain composed. Even now, etiquette rules the body. A royal pregnancy wasn't private. Courtiers took bets on whether it would be a boy or girl. Ambassadors sent coded letters home reporting the queen's cravings, or whether her belly carried high or low. Some even bribed servants to report on the color of her urine. And when the time finally came to give birth, it was anything but intimate. You wait as a signal bell is rung. It begins. The birth is imminent. The midwife washes her hands in rosewater and brandy. Nearby, a priest waits silently in case the child or the queen requires last rites. A velvet screen is drawn around the bed, but you can still hear everything. The groans, the soft chanting, the short, sharp commands: push now, breathe, hold the cloth, again. The room fills with women ladies of the chamber, wet nurses, even noble observers. In some courts, royal births were witnessed to prevent false heirs or switched infants. One French queen gave birth in a public ceremony before 30 nobles. They stood in silence while she screamed. And scream she does. You flinch. It's a sound ripped from another world. The queen's face contorts, her hands claw at the sheets, and the midwife presses down gently, but with purpose. There are no painkillers, no stitches, just oil prayers and endurance. After what feels like hours, you hear it, a thin, wet cry. The child is born. A girl. A pause. A quiet grief. Then the ritual continues. The baby is wrapped in silk, bathed in warm wine, and placed in the arms of the wet nurse. The queen is examined, stitched with thread soaked in vinegar, and finally mercifully allowed to sleep. You step back, trying to process it all. The filth, the holiness, the unbearable intimacy of a process rendered as performance. And this isn't a rare event. Royal women gave birth over and over again. Some bore 20 children. Others died in the process. Infections ran rampant. Placenta was often retained. Fever took them days later. And all of it, every groan, tear, and lost drop was woven into the tapestry of duty. Because in this world, a queen's power was not her word, her mind, or her rule. It was her womb. And tonight, as she sleeps beneath stained sheets, swollen and broken and praised for her endurance, you finally understand what royal motherhood truly meant. It wasn't glory. It was survival. You return to the chamber the next morning, and the air is thick not with incense or perfume this time, but with milk. It clings to everything, to the sheets, to the queen's breath, to the wool-wrapped baby still pink and blinking. But the queen doesn't hold her newborn. She merely glances toward the cradle while a servant gently turns her head back toward the cup of broth she's being coaxed to sip. The child rests in another woman's arms entirely. Meet the wet nurse. It's a scene you'll witness again and again across centuries, and courts, noblewomen, queens, and empresses delegating the act of breastfeeding to hired breasts. Because nursing, though natural, was seen as inconvenient, unbecoming, and according to many physicians, dangerous to the womb. Royal women were told that to nurse their own children would sap their beauty, disrupt their humors, and interfere with producing more heirs. So into the nursery steps another woman, usually of peasant stock, always carefully vetted. Her milk had to be pure, her morals acceptable, her own child ideally weaned or dead. Sometimes she was offered money to stop producing children of her own, to ensure her milk remained devoted only to the royal line. You watch as she cradles the infant girl and latches her gently to the breast, humming a lullaby in a dialect foreign to the court. The baby sighs, suckles, and sleeps. The queen never hears the song. This isn't a tale of compassion. It's a system. Wet nurses weren't just caregivers. They were human livestock prized for bodily function. Their milk was tested by crude taste and temperature checks. Their habits were policed: no garlic, no wine, no indecent thoughts. Some were forced to live under supervision in the nursery wing. Others weren't allowed to speak to the mother beyond a curt nod. One 17th century royal advisor wrote that a wet nurse should be seen as a cow in the field, valued but not respected. You glance at the woman holding the infant, and for a moment, her eyes meet yours. They are dry and ancient. Here's tonight's strange fringe fact. In parts of Europe, noblewomen believed their children would inherit the personality of their wet nurse through the milk. Cheerful nurse, cheerful child. Anxious nurse, weak-willed heir. This belief had royal mothers obsessing over their nurses' temperaments, going so far as to have them supervised by priests or physicians for weeks before hiring. One French princess dismissed 6 candidates before settling on a woman who smiled while folding laundry. She delivered her decision with the line, "She looks like she won't give nightmares through the nipple." Historians still argue whether the practice of using wet nurses was more about medical advice or sheer class division. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Either way, the result was the same: a quiet split between mother and child from the very first breath. You shadow the nurse as she moves about the nursery cradle feeding stool cloths soaked in goat's milk for wiping. She sings in a whisper while the baby feeds again. When the infant fusses, she rocks with a practiced rhythm, bouncing on her heels, whispering nonsense rhymes. These aren't court songs. These are lullabies from another world, a hayfield, a barn, a village by the river. The baby doesn't know the difference, but you do. Meanwhile, in the queen's chamber, another ritual is unfolding. She is being restored with herbal teas, ointments, and prayers. Her breasts, full but untouched, are bound with cloth to discourage milk flow. Some maids rub her chest with oil of sage or camphor to suppress lactation. She winces. Binding hurts. The skin is hot and stretched, but she doesn't cry out. To cry would suggest regret. A court physician enters and speaks gently about her color, her appetite, the strength of her pulse. No one asks if she misses the baby. No one dares. That's not her role. She has done her duty, delivered, and heir survived the night. Still, in rare moments, some queens did try to nurse. One Habsburg empress insisted on feeding her firstborn, to the horror of her advisors. When the baby fell ill 2 weeks later, she was blamed. Not the hygiene, not the midwives, not the moldy nursery mattress, her. The child survived. Her reputation did not. Noble women who chose to nurse were seen as eccentric, even unstable. Some were accused of vanity, wanting to bond with their children, instead of focusing on politics. One queen was called an uttered fool in a letter from a foreign ambassador. The phrase stuck in court circles for years, and yet wet nurses were not without power. Some became confidants. Others were elevated to royal service. A few even remained in the household long after the children grew up. One Italian duchess insisted on giving her wet nurse a ruby ring for every child she helped raise. You see one such woman now, ancient and bowed, wiping down a nursery crib with a cloth embroidered decades earlier, her own name stitched in gold beside the initials of the baby she once fed. But most wet nurses disappeared. Once their milk dried up, so did their value. Some returned to villages. Others stayed on as servants if they were lucky. A few faded into anonymity, remembered only in brief scrawled ledger entries, paid to wet nurse 6 florins. Dismissed thereafter. Still, they lived in the margins of royalty, close enough to hear lullabies, to smell the perfumed linen of a cradle, to witness first smiles and first teeth, and yet never close enough to matter. Tonight, as the candle gutters and the cradle rocks slowly to a stop, you understand something deeper than biology. The bond between mother and child, so sacred, so primal, was something royal women often surrendered. Not because they wanted to, but because the system demanded it. And the woman who took their place, she sang to the child, but she wept alone. You descend a creaking staircase toward a private wing of the chateau, where the scent of lavender water collides with something darker, stale air, body odor, old wine, and something sour beneath the perfume, something skin-warmed and time-aged. You're standing in a royal bedchamber. It's a room of immense luxury, a carved canopy bed, taller than most doorframes, draped with crimson silk and gold-braided valances. The mattress is feather-stuffed and velvet-covered with embroidered pillows, arranged like sentries around the edges. It's the kind of bed you might fantasize about sinking into until you actually lift the coverlet. The sheets haven't been changed in weeks. You try not to wince as you peel back the corner of the bedding. The linen is stained, not dramatically, but visibly yellowing at the neck, dark smudges at the feet. Faint, rust-colored circles you'd rather not guess about. A subtle musk rises like breath trapped in fabric. Welcome to the secret of noble sleep. Clean beds were a rarity. Royal women, especially in 17th and 18th century France, didn't have their linens changed daily or weekly, often not even monthly. Washing sheets was laborious, expensive, and damaging to fabric. It required boiling water vats of lye or soap, hours of scrubbing and beating on stones. So instead, the linen was aired, hung over windows or chairs, and then reused. Historians still argue how often bed linens were changed in even the grandest palaces. Some suggest every few weeks. Others, depending on the woman's health or the season, say it might have been quarterly. What's not debated These sheets absorbed everything. You watch as a chambermaid uses a horsehair brush to gently scrape crumbs from the queen's side of the bed, bits of bread from last night's supper left uneaten on a tray and shaken off the mattress like dandruff. A linen cloth follows, doused in rose vinegar dabbed lightly across the headrest, not to clean, but to refresh the smell. And yet the bed is more than a place to sleep. It's ceremonial. The lever and coucher rising and retiring are royal rituals. The Duchess you're watching now is expected to receive guests in her bedchamber each morning, reclining against plumped pillows, her hair loosely bound in ribbons. It's not intimate. It's political theater. Courtiers wait in line to offer greetings, compliments, and gossip, while she sips warm milk under a canopy laced with dust. There's a fringe detail for you. Some noble women, especially in Louis XIV's court, had a designated bed linen airing servant whose sole duty was to turn and flap the sheets while the lady was at morning prayers. Their hands reeked permanently of mildew and lavender. The mattress, not much better. Stuffed with feathers or straw depending on the century and region, they were rarely replaced. Over time, they slumped in the center, forming body-shaped depressions, where sweat oil, blood, and whatever else happened between the sheets quietly settled. You glance at the center of the bed and wonder how many years' worth of royal sleep and royal secrets are buried beneath that embroidered cover. But worst of all are the pillows. Soft, yes. Decorative, certainly. But they too are never washed. Pillowcases might be switched out occasionally, but the cushions themselves, stuffed with wool goose down or shredded cloth, accumulate everything. They absorb perfume and oil, scalp sweat, and powder traces of menstrual blood, even the breath of lovers long gone. And yet they are always fluffed. Always perfect. Because appearances matter more than cleanliness. You watch as a maid adjusts the sheets before the Duchess's midday rest. She sprinkles dried herbs, verbena, chamomile, sometimes thyme, between the mattress and top sheet. They're meant to mask the smell, calm the nerves, and repel moths. One maid favors rosemary and bay leaves, claiming it keeps away the dream rot. You're not sure what that is. You don't ask. And when illness strikes, it gets worse. Sick beds in royal households are rarely stripped clean. The sheets are changed only if soiled beyond denial. Otherwise, the same linens are gently spritzed with rose water, smoothed and turned over. You visit the sick chamber of an aging princess suffering from vapors, and the stench of stale sweat mingled with rotting fabric clings to everything. Her bed is wrapped in layers of damp linen, and she sleeps beneath it all like a moth caught in a napkin. Here's a lesser-known fact. The Bourbons, yes. The glittering French royals believed that too much cleanliness weakened the Constitution. One court physician insisted that a lady of strength should lie in linens warmed by her own scent. The quote is burned into your mind now. You'd like to unhear it. Still, the bed was sacred space. Not just for sleep, but for intimacy, childbirth, recovery, and power. Royal women gave birth here, received their lovers, died, and each time the sheets bore witness and never quite let go. One chambermaid quietly confesses to you that she sometimes burns the linens of recently deceased noblewomen instead of laundering them. It never washes out, she whispers. The weight of them, the dreams, the death. You watch another maid hang out a bedsheet to air. It catches the wind like a sail flapping gently above the courtyard, pale and trembling. On closer inspection, there are still faint discolorations near the hem memories, perhaps that laundering alone couldn't banish. And even as royal women doused themselves in perfume, painted their faces white and curled beneath canopies of brocade, the truth remained close. They slept in their own histories, layered into linen, folded into feather beds, pressed into pillows that never forgot a thing. Tonight, as you return to your own bed, freshly laundered and faintly warm from the dryer, remember this comfort is a modern luxury. Cleanliness even more so. And centuries ago, behind lace curtains and layers of etiquette, royal women lay their heads each night on pillows that smelled not of dreams, but of everything they were forced to endure in silence. You leave the fragrant gloom of French lace and mildew behind and step into something sharper, colder, icier even. The chill nips through your sleeves as you cross into the domain of the Russian Tsarinas, where velvet hangs heavy on the walls and fur throws are piled not for decoration, but survival. The palace is a glittering bone cage, and here hygiene becomes an entirely different game. Because when water freezes in its own pitcher, washing becomes optional. You're in 18th century St. Petersburg now, and the grandeur is immediate. Fabergé baubles shimmer on side tables. Portraits of czars glare from gilt frames. But you're not here for the spectacle. You're heading toward the private quarters of a Romanov empress, where a different kind of elegance, cold, constrained, and practical rules her toilette. She sits at her dressing table shrouded in white ermine fingers, red from the morning chill. Her lady-in-waiting hands her a cloth steeped in pine vinegar. This today is her bath. She wipes herself slowly, underarms chest behind the ears, flinching slightly as the vinegar stings cracked winter skin. Running water, don't be ridiculous. Pipes freeze, basins shatter. Even chamber pots have to be cracked with a poker in the early morning, just to be usable. One maid carries the pot like it's a cauldron, cheeks flushed from the cold steam rising from the opening in ghostly spirals. And still, this is royalty. So despite the elements, hygiene must be preserved. But here it means adaptation. Tooth care, for instance. You watch as the Tsarina dabs her finger into a tin of dark gray powdered charcoal mixed with pine ash and dried mint. She rubs it gently over her teeth with a linen cloth, then rinses with a mouthful of vodka diluted with snowmelt. No joke. It disinfects kind of. Also numbs. A 2-for-1 deal. Tonight's fringe tidbit: Russian noblewomen sometimes used urzhevaya voda, a concoction of tar water, pine oil, and honey as both perfume and disinfectant. The scent: imagine a forest set on fire by bees. It doesn't smell bad exactly, just purposeful. The Tsarina dabs it behind her ears and onto the insides of her wrists. Later, she'll rub it into her boots to keep the leather soft, and the smell not entirely horrifying. You lean over her shoulder and glance at the basin she's used for hand washing. The water is gray with soap shavings and rose oil, but she won't dip her hands directly in. Instead, the maid pours the mixture from a height, trickling it over the Tsarina's fingers, then catches it in a silver bowl beneath. The dirty water is thrown out the window, onto the street, or a courtyard, or a servant. It depends on the wind. Historians still argue whether Russian noblewomen were truly more fastidious than their European counterparts, or whether the rituals were simply different. Certainly, the climate demanded changes. Sweat was less of a constant companion than in Versailles, but dry skin, frostbite, and chilblains were daily trials. Hence, the tallow creams, beeswax salves, and fat-rich pomades slathered liberally over the face, hands, and even the legs. You see one maid warming a pot of goose grease on a brazier to night's lip balm. The undergarments, too, tell their own story. You inspect a pair of linen drawers lined with fur at the waist and hems. They haven't been changed in days. The Tsarina wears 3 layers of chemises, all scented with cloves, then redusted each morning with finely crushed birch bark powder to absorb moisture. And still you catch a scent. Not unpleasant, but intimate. the clean musk of skin doing its best with what it's been given. One court lady whispers that in winter, even noble thighs grow mushrooms. You can't tell if she's joking. She doesn't laugh. You follow the Tsarina to her bedchamber, where her evening routine includes freshening the sheets with a hot brick wrapped in birch-scented cloth and slipped beneath the blanket. Her nightcap, woven of silk and lined with fox fur, covers her oiled braids, which haven't been washed in over a week. They're kept neat-combed daily with ivory pins and dusted with starch to keep the scalp dry. And lice always a possibility. You spot a louse comb soaking in spirits on the windowsill. A quiet, sober precaution. The chamber pot, here it is again, is tucked beneath a carved wooden stool lined with pine needles. Yes, pine needles. Not just for the scent, though that helps. They're also used for wiping. Coarser than cloth, but biodegradable. And in a climate where washing rags froze solid, they did the trick. And when menstruation arrives, the routine shifts again. The Tsarina's undergarments are fitted with pockets sewn from linen, into which folded cloth pads are tucked. These are soaked in wine before used, then rinsed in vinegar afterward. You watch a maid kneel at a bucket swirling bloody linen like it's laundry, humming a lullaby that doesn't belong in a palace. There are no heating pipes, only braziers and bodies. So much of royal hygiene here is about conserving heat, sleeping in layers, washing only what's visible, powdering over grease using smoke to sterilize pine tar to perfume. You see a court physician arrive bringing a small bottle of camphor and bear bile. It's meant to rub on the feet before sleep to keep the skin from cracking. The Tsarina accepts it with gratitude, applies it slowly, and then dons a pair of woolen socks lined with dog fur. This is not the scented luxury of Versailles. This is winter survival gilded in gold. You sit quietly as the Tsarina finally eases into bed. Her body oiled her scalp, powdered her fingers, fragrant with sap and smoke. The chamber darkens. A maid slides the chamber pot an inch closer to the bed just in case. And you realize something: cleanliness here is not about appearance. It's about preservation. Every drop of warm water, every scrap of fur, every spoonful of scented grease is a gesture against a cold that never fully lifts. In Russia, hygiene wasn't about pretending the body didn't exist. It was about keeping it alive just long enough for morning to come again. You slip through a carved oak doorway and into another dressing chamber, different this time. Warmer, earthier, but no less pungent. The scent that greets you isn't floral or perfumed. It's heavier, closer to leather and honey, with a faint undercurrent of animal fat. You've entered the realm of hair, the real hair beneath the wigs, the braids, the curls, the pride, and the parasites. You're standing behind a royal woman, seated before a mirror, her back straight, her eyes fixed forward. Her lady's maid gently unpins the day's hairpiece, revealing a head full of damp, twisted braids, some unraveling, others slicked tight against the scalp. The air shifts, the truth emerges. Because noble hair, beautiful, elaborate, symbolic, was also dirty, sticky, and crawling. You watch the maid work in silence, slowly unraveling each braid with fingers greased in bear fat pomade. The hair gleams not with cleanliness, but with sheen. This isn't oil from health, it's a product. A blend of rendered fat, beeswax, and perfume applied daily to keep the strands pliable, styled, and safe from the elements. It also locks in everything else: dust, soot, smoke, lice, sweat. The scalp beneath is pale, angry, and inflamed. You don't say anything. Neither does the queen. She knows. Lice were a constant presence in aristocratic hair care. Not a possibility, a guarantee. And treating them wasn't a matter of washing, it was a matter of strategic control. Full washing of hair with water was rare. Maybe once a month. In colder climates, less. Instead, the hair was powdered with starch to absorb oil and combed. Again and again. But here's tonight's fringe delight. Some noblewomen massaged rum or brandy into their scalps as a lice deterrent. Did it work sometimes? Did it sting open sores always? You watch as the maid pours a thimble of alcohol onto a linen pad and presses it into the hairline. The queen flinches but doesn't move. Historians still argue whether royal women actually believed these methods worked, or whether they were simply rituals, something to do, to control, to pretend. Either way, the lice remained, and when powdering resumed, it wasn't gentle. The starch was mixed with orris root or lavender and sieved over the head with a puff pad coating the hairline and crown like flour on bread dough. Excess was combed through until the powder clung to oil, fat, and skin. It dulled the shine, but not the smell. Powdering was so central that dedicated poudrier, powder attendants, existed in some courts. Their job: dust the heads, clean the mess, manage the sneezing fits that followed. You hear one now, 3 dainty sneezes in a row, muffled behind a handkerchief, stitched with lace and lies. But not all hair was powdered. For the real elite, hair was styled, braided, looped, curled, and elevated into designs so complex they required scaffolding. You glance at a royal hairstyle journal lying on a nearby chair. Sketches of hairstyles with names like Le Papillon, L'Innocence, Le Nid d'Oiseau. One includes a full miniature garden, fake flowers, wire-stiffened grass, tiny birds made of silk and feather. And the base of it, all human hair, often not even their own. Royal women frequently wore augmentation braids, woven strands from servants' prisoners or bought at market. These were stitched into their own hair or coiled beneath the wig base. Some even kept mourning hairpieces crafted from the locks of dead relatives. You spot one now curled neatly inside a velvet box. It smells faintly of soap and mildew. Maintenance of these masterpieces was grueling. Some took hours to build and were left in place for days, even weeks. Sleeping with a coiffure meant reclining on a special padded frame, face up, motionless, like a corpse at rest. And washing, forget it. You didn't touch the sculpture. You scented it. You prayed over it. You swatted at flies and hoped for the best. Let's not skip lice inspection. You watch the queen tilt her head while the maid uses a long, fine comb to inspect behind the ears and along the nape. 2 louse nits, tiny pearl-like eggs, are found and flicked away with a practiced hand. No comment is made. They both pretend it didn't happen. For itching, women used head scratchers, delicate silver tools with rounded prongs. Ornate versions were encrusted with gems. You imagine a banquet table where each woman secretly holds one under the tablecloth, scratching at a bite just behind the ear. There were worse afflictions too: ringworm, scabies, folliculitis. You spot a pale patch at the queen's hairline where no strands grow. It's been covered with a velvet ribbon for years. Decorative, yes, but also deeply strategic. In some royal circles, baldness became a whispered fear. Hair was femininity, fertility, power. Losing it meant losing face. Women applied tinctures of rosemary nettle and even boiled lizard to the scalp in hopes of regrowth. Some believed that rubbing the head with dog urine warmed over charcoal would encourage follicles. Others turned to arsenic-based tonics, which worked for a while until they didn't. One monarch's mistress famously drank a beauty tonic of bull's blood, and myrrh, convinced it made her hair grow thicker. She died at 26, with fabulous curls. Tonight, as the queen's hair is finally rebraided and bound under a lace cap, the routine ends with silence. The scalp is inflamed, the strands stiff with oil. The air carries the sharp tang of pomade, the sweetness of orris root, and the low, ever-present ache of endurance. You step back and watch her rise, her head slightly heavier, her neck adjusted to carry the weight of artifice. Her hair is perfect now, glimmering, immaculate. It will stay that way for 5 days, and underneath the lice begin again. You're not in a palace anymore. The silk-draped walls have vanished, the powdered wigs are gone, and the perfume fog has lifted, because tonight you're following a queen who no longer has a court, a title, or even a bathtub. Marie Antoinette is on the run. It's 1791, and the French monarchy is unraveling faster than a worn-out corset. The streets of Paris are boiling with rage. The royal family is plotting escape, and the courtly rituals of hygiene are crumbling beneath the weight of revolution. You find yourself inside a dim carriage, its wheels clattering over cobblestones, where the former Queen of France sits swaddled in travel-stained clothes, face-pale fingers tremulous, and very, very unwashed. Fleeing royalty doesn't have the luxury of fresh linens or scented oils. Marie's chemise, once changed daily in Versailles, under a canopy of embroidered fleur-de-lis, has now gone 5 days without replacement. Her hair, once brushed and powdered by a team of valets, lies limp beneath a soiled headscarf. Her undergarments, those sacred silk pieces stitched in secret by master seamstresses, are stiff with sweat and friction. She doesn't complain. She doesn't have the energy. You glance around the cramped space. The Queen shares the coach with Louis XVI and their children, all of them wrapped in borrowed clothing. The air inside smells like wool, leather, anxiety, and human fatigue. There is no ventilation. The windows are curtained shut. The chamber pot beneath the seat has been used twice and cannot be emptied until they stop again. If they stop again. Once the epitome of fragrant opulence, Marie now dabs vinegar-soaked cloths under her arms in silence, the same cloth used yesterday and probably tomorrow. Here's your fringe fact for the road. Royal travel during political exile included scent packets stitched into clothing seams. Marie's petticoat has small muslin sachets filled with dried lavender, clove, and mint. They help mask the smell. A little. Mostly they just remind her of better times. Historians still argue whether she grasped how thoroughly her world had collapsed during these travels. But her body knew. Her skin, used to weekly baths of rose water and goat's milk, is now flaking from neglect. Her feet, always pampered in silk slippers, are swollen from walking. One maid whispers that the Queen's heels are cracked, bleeding at the seams. There's no balm left, only linen strips tied with twine. At their rest stop a noble estate still loyal to the monarchy. Marie is led into a side room, meant to serve as a temporary bedchamber. There's no bath, just a chipped basin, a pitcher of cold water, and a moth-eaten towel. She's handed a rag and a bottle of old cologne. She doesn't ask for anything more. She wipes down her arms, her face, the backs of her knees. She winces at the scent of herself. Not because it's rank, but because it reminds her of fear. The body always betrays you eventually. You sit with her while she combs her fingers through her unwashed hair. The last time it was powdered, it had been shaped into a ship. Now it clings to her scalp, greasy and tangled. Her once legendary skin, praised in court poems for its almond dew, is breaking out in stress rash, made worse by the layers of dust and road filth that no powder can fix. And still, she clings to some habits. She pulls from her bag a tiny box of rouge, now nearly empty, and dabs her cheeks. Just a little color. Just enough to pretend. A lady of the bedchamber offers her a handkerchief steeped in orange blossom water. She presses it to her temple, breathing deeply, her only luxury. Then it's time to move again. You're back in the carriage. The pot beneath the seat sloshes. No one speaks. No one makes eye contact. The queen adjusts her dress, hides the sweat stains with a shawl, and smiles faintly at her daughter who is trying not to cry. You reach Paris by morning, dirty, cold, exhausted, and then you're captured. The return to the city is brutal. The crowd jeers. The once adored queen is now just the Austrian. They call her Madame Deficit. She keeps her head high, but she smells like horses and vinegar. In the days that follow, she is confined. Not in a palace, but in the temple tower. The quarters are narrow, the plumbing crude, the linens coarse. Bathing becomes a luxury again, something negotiated. She is allowed to wash once a week in cold water. Her menstrual cloths, once changed by maids with embroidered initials, are now laundered by strangers with rough hands. And yet she persists. She still brushes her teeth with salt. She still perfumes her undergarments with dried herbs. She still plucks stray hairs from her brows. Not because she thinks it matters, but because it's the only dignity she has left. Even in a cell, she's royal. She's human. She's trying. One day she requests a change of linen. It takes 3 days to arrive. The sheet smells of lime soap and cellar damp. She hugs it to her face before laying it on the straw mattress. She smiles faintly and whispers something you don't catch. It might have been merci, or finally, or simply clean. You descend into dimness again this time, not in the comfort of palaces, or even the disguised grime of exile, but into the flickering, uncertain shadows of disease. You're not in one royal chamber. You're in all of them across centuries and courts, because when sickness came for the crown, it didn't care about titles. Tonight, you're here for what they called the itch. It begins with a spot, a single red patch behind the ear, a roughness beneath the knee, then the fever, then the whispering. Because royal women, though supposedly divine, bled, birthed, and burned with illness just like anyone else. And when those illnesses began to show on the skin, that's when the cover-up became more frantic than the treatment. Smallpox, syphilis, scabies, even leprosy in the early medieval periods. They all carved their way into royal courts, and when they did, it wasn't just health at stake, it was appearance, reputation, marriageability, political leverage. A scab was never just a scab. A rash wasn't just a rash. It was a signal. You step into the bedroom of a 17th century princess afflicted with smallpox. The curtains are drawn, the mirrors are covered, the fire hisses low, and she's lying in a bed of stale lavender pillows, her face swaddled in a cloth soaked with goat's milk and ground pearl. The lesions are everywhere, livid red, crusted with honey to draw out the poison. Her maid dabs gently, whispering a prayer. You catch the scent, sweat herbs, and the metallic sharpness of infection. She will survive, but her skin will remember, and she will never be viewed the same. Makeup will help. Years from now, you'll see her apply thick layers of white ceruse to hide the pockmarks. But the whispers won't stop. She's marked, touched. In some courts, a queen bearing visible disease scars was considered unfit for portraits. Her image became political liability. One ambassador wrote, "Her beauty is dimmed, and thus so is her power." And then there's syphilis. A royal mistress in France sits at her vanity dabbing powder over a nose that's beginning to collapse. Literally. The disease erodes her face from within, beginning with weeping sores in the mouth, and ending with disfigurement so complete that even the most skilled painters can't salvage her likeness. She uses slices of velvet and wax to shape a false nose for court appearances. It falls once during a dance. She smiles and keeps waltzing. No one says a word. Here's your fringe tidbit. During the 16th century, some royal women in Italy and Spain used mercury-based treatments to purge illness from their systems. These were rubbed on the skin, injected under the arms, or even inhaled as vapor. The results: mouth ulcers, madness, and death. But at least the rash faded, briefly. You sit now beside an English duchess suffering from the French disease. Her tongue is swollen. Her breath smells like rotting fruit. She wears gloves not for elegance, but to hide peeling palms. She's instructed to chew on cinnamon and frankincense to disguise the stench. It doesn't work. Her husband won't kiss her, but he still sleeps beside her. And then there are the whispers behind the door. Cursed. Witch's blood. God's punishment. Historians still argue how much court physicians understood about these diseases. Some believed they were caused by excess heat of the womb or bad menstrual balance. Others insisted they were the result of impure thoughts. One even warned that gazing too long at a syphilitic man may cause facial collapse in virgins. There were also non-lethal itches. Scabies called the scratch ran through courts like wildfire. Shared linens, tight corsets, the refusal to bathe. Perfect conditions for mites. A queen with scabies was expected to endure it in silence while her maids applied a paste of vinegar and sulfur behind her knees and between her toes. One Russian empress wore silver rings on her fingers, coated with camphor oil, so she could scratch without breaking the skin. It didn't help. One night, you hear scratching beneath the covers. A young archduchess has smeared herself with goose fat and crushed mint in desperation. It's the third time she's caught the itch. The physician shrugs. The linens haven't been changed in a month. It's no mystery. But worse still are the diseases that leave no marks, just exhaustion, collapse, and fear. The vapors, the melancholia, the sudden bleeding that no one can explain. You see a Bavarian countess wake in a cold sweat, pull back her sheets, and discover red streaks across her thighs. She panics. Not menstruation, something else. Internal bleeding, a ruptured sore. She whispers a confession to her lady's maid, who fetches vinegar, a sponge, and a crucifix. Nothing else can be done. The sheets are burned. Still, appearance must be maintained. The countess is powdered-gloved and seated in the garden for her daily viewing. She smiles through dizziness. When she faints, it's attributed to the heat. When she vomits, the maid says, "Too many rose petals in her tea." You glance at the court painter standing nearby. His canvas shows a perfect woman. Smooth skin, calm eyes. No rash, no missing teeth, no evidence. Just like always. Because for royal women, disease wasn't allowed to exist above the surface. The pain, the itching, the sores, the fevers, all of it had to remain hidden, shaped into silence, and powdered into irrelevance. Even as their bodies rotted beneath silk and bone. And as you step away from the bed of another sick queen, her hands trembling beneath lace cuffs, her skin mottled with rash and rose water, you understand what her smile really means. It means she's still in control, if only of her disguise. The hallway is silent, but behind every door there's tension, heavy and hushed like an unanswered question. You pass gilded frames, rooms veiled in incense and secrecy, and know what's waiting just beyond the most taboo subject of them all. Not war, not affairs, not even disease. Menstruation. Again. But this time, not the linens or the cloths. You're stepping into the realm of fear. Because here, menstruation isn't just a bodily function. It's a sign, a symbol, a supernatural event that royal women were expected to control, and feared when they couldn't. You arrive in the quarters of a young queen, barely 17, newly married, nervously staring out the window while her maid holds a blood-stained rag between two fingers. They're not ashamed. They're relieved. This means she's not pregnant. Not yet. But more importantly, it means she's not barren. And in royal circles, not barren is worth 1,000 dowries. You listen closely as the maid speaks softly to another, "It came on the red moon." You freeze, because now you're hearing it, the myths, the superstitions whispered between the rustle of chemises and the rustling of the rushes. That menstruation could be tied to the moon, that it could predict fertility, that it could ruin wine-warp mirrors, poison roses, or kill bees with a glance. Fringe detail. One 15th century manual warned that menstruating women should not bake bread, for the dough would refuse to rise, and the loaves would turn sour with the humors of the womb. Another claimed they should not walk barefoot across tiled floors, lest their lunar taint seep into the stone. You watch as a chambermaid sprinkles salt in the threshold of the queen's bedchamber, whispering a protective phrase in Old French. No one comments. Everyone steps around it. Historians still argue how much of this was believed by the nobility versus imposed on the lower servants. But enough royal correspondence survives letters where queens and duchesses discuss their cycles with the language of storms and curses to suggest that these beliefs weren't just background noise. They were part of the architecture of power. When a queen failed to conceive, she was told to balance the blood. When she miscarried, they checked the moon's phase. When she bled too much, they tied sprigs of nettle to her thighs or made her drink bull's blood in honey. And when she stopped bleeding altogether, especially too early, it was a scandal. You slip through another door. This one belongs to an older royal well into her 40s, her stomach still bound beneath stiff stays, her face painted as smooth as it can be. Her maids are quiet today. They know what this morning's discovery means. She hasn't bled in 3 months. They whisper it, the change. Menopause. But they don't say that word. They call it the ending, the silver curtain, or more ominously, God's retreat. The queen's physician recommends leeches behind the knees, then offers her a tincture of crushed violets and sheep's marrow to restore balance. She declines with a wave of the hand. She already knows what's happening. She's done. In a court where fertility equals currency, where blood was proof of potential, her body has closed its account. She will no longer be watched for signs charted against lunar calendars or prayed for in cathedral vigils. She has transitioned from vessel to ghost. And yet some still fear her. Because another layer of superstition lurks under it all, post-menstrual women are dangerous. Some texts say they carry heat in the blood, that their unspent womb energy rises into the brain, causes madness, or in some cases, sorcery. You remember reading an Inquisition transcript where a duchess, childless aging, was accused of bewitching her rival's fertility. The only proof her cycle had stopped. That was enough. Tonight's queen isn't accused. She's too clever for that. But she notices the way the young maids no longer make eye contact, the way the court physician hesitates before touching her wrist. She is unbound now, and to them that's either holy or terrifying. And then there's the ritual burning. In several royal households, especially among the Spanish Habsburgs, it was customary to burn the menstrual rags, not just for sanitation, but to prevent evil transmission. If another woman handled the cloth, especially a maid of lower station, it could drain the queen's womb. You watch a servant lower a folded piece of bloodied linen into a brass bowl of coal ash, lips moving in silent prayer. Even cloths that weren't burned were stored in locked boxes. One in particular, a small walnut chest bound with iron, sits in the corner of a princess's room. Inside, rags are carefully folded, dried, and preserved. They are labeled with ink: April full moon, May waning moon, June absent. You know exactly what the last one means. And all the while, royal women lived under scrutiny. If they wept too much, she bleeds wrongly. If they were quiet, the womb has risen. If they fainted, grew thin, gained weight, skipped a meal, or skipped a dance, all of it circled back to the blood. It was both their shame and their proof. One queen, frustrated by a false pregnancy rumor, reportedly stained her bedsheets with chicken blood and had them displayed during her monthly withdrawal. She announced it with a smile. Another, caught in the middle of succession debates, claimed to menstruate twice per month in order to appear fertile. Her maids were forced to back the lie, washing clean cloths stained with pig's blood in secret. And yet, amidst all the myths, many royal women developed their own calendars, private notes, hidden logs, quiet communications with other noble women who'd already passed through the same rituals. You find one such diary tucked into a lace-bound book of poetry. The entry reads, "The moon is full. My belly aches. I bleed again. Thank God, I am still useful." And in those 10 words, you hear everything. The fear, the gratitude, the exhaustion, the quiet tyranny of blood. So tonight, when you lie still and think of crowns, do not imagine only the jewels or the silks. Remember the unseen thrones, the rush-strewn floor where a queen knelt in pain, the singed rag in a brass bowl, the silver spoon stirring nettle tea. The crown sat on the head, yes, but its weight lived always in the womb. You're up early this morning, earlier than any duchess or dowager countess. The sun isn't up yet, but the castle is already stirring. You slip past the velvet curtain into a narrow passage where laughter is muffled and footsteps are lighter than air. These aren't the sounds of royalty, they belong to the ones who serve royalty. Tonight you walk in the shadows of the silent witnesses, the bedchamber staff. They are everywhere and nowhere. You watch as a chambermaid, barely 17 steps barefoot, across the stone floor, carrying a tray with a cracked porcelain basin and a rag that smells faintly of vinegar. She moves quickly, silently, like part of the furniture. In fact, that's what she's trained to be. Present but invisible. This isn't just a cleaning shift. This is morning toilette, the sacred time before the court sees the queen. And the people who witness it, the valets, the chambermaids, the tire women, they know everything. More than husbands, more than doctors, more than God. They've seen the royal armpits with the week-old sweat. They've changed the chamber pots during stomach sickness. They've scrubbed blood-stained linens in the dead of night, pretending not to notice that it's the 3rd miscarriage this year. And they do not speak. Because to speak is death, or at least dismissal. The hierarchy is strict. First come the first ladies of the bedchamber, aristocrats themselves, assigned by status, not by skill. Their job is ceremonial, to oversee. But the real work falls to the chambermaids, whose fingers have scraped hardened pomade from wigs, wiped mildew from corset linings, and carried chamber pots filled with the unspeakable. And yet, they know how to pour rose water without making a sound. They know how to apply lye soap to menstrual cloths in freezing water until the stains become shadows. They know exactly how many seconds to linger when the Duchess pretends not to hear her baby crying in another room. Tonight's fringe detail. Some royal women gave their trusted maids small symbolic gifts of perfume, not to honor service, but to mask odor during duties. One tire woman kept a vial of civet pinned to her bodice, not for herself, for her lady's thighs. You spot one such bottle now beside a dented tin comb, missing 2 teeth. You watch as a valet empties a chamber pot into a pail without flinching. He doesn't wear gloves. He wipes the rim with a cloth that will be boiled at dawn and reused by noon. The pot is then replaced, its contents swapped with lavender water, not to be used, just to make it smell usable. There are no written records of these acts. No heralds announce them. No portraits commemorate the woman who once cleaned lice from the queen's nape. But without them, no queen appears immaculate. No duchess makes it to the throne room. No princess wears white without someone somewhere having washed it in silence. Historians still argue about how much authority these staff truly had. Some say they were mere hands. Others argue that those hands held power because information flows downward, and secrets always live with those who clean up after them. You hear one now? A whisper between maids, she bled again. Another pouring water, the prince isn't hers. A third folding linen, he came through the garden door. She let him in. Truth gossip doesn't matter. They know where the bodies are buried. More accurately, they know where the chamber pots are hidden and whose stains appeared at what hour. They are historians without ink, archivists without books. One chambermaid you follow has kept a secret for 10 years. She found the queen collapsed after childbirth, her body soaked with blood and sweat, her face the color of unpolished marble. She cleaned her alone wordlessly and said nothing when the royal physician arrived. The queen never looked her in the eye again, but she did leave her a ring 2 winters later. You see it now on her calloused hand, simple gold, no stone, still worn. Then there are the thieves. Yes, not all silent witnesses are loyal. Some valets steal bits of cloth, vials of perfume, even stained linens sold later on the black market as relics. One rogue footman in Prussia reportedly sold the queen's used chamber rag as a fertility charm to a merchant's wife. She got pregnant 2 months later. Coincidence maybe. Or maybe just a very expensive placebo. And then there's the surveillance, the ones who are paid to report. You see a maid fold a piece of parchment and slip it into her garter. She's a spy. Not for a foreign king, no, for a rival duchess hoping to gather scandal. Her report will include how often the queen bathes, whether her appetite has returned, whether she's gained weight around the hips. Because in the court, even your hygiene betrays you. A woman who bathes more than usual is either sick or sleeping with someone new. One who powders too little may be grieving. One who has her sheets changed twice in a week, pregnant. Again. And the bedchamber staff knows first. They adjust their behaviors accordingly. The basin is placed closer. The fresh linens arrive early. The vinegar water is cooled with snow to soothe aching thighs. And no one says a word. They've seen everything, these women and men. The fingernails torn during childbirth. The clumps of hair in combs after a miscarriage. The bruises not from accidents, but from royal hands. They clean around it. They fold the reality into napkins. They hide it behind lavender sachets. They know the queens better than the kings do. And that's the great irony of royal hygiene. It isn't private. It never was. From birth to death, every bath, every blood stain, every rash, every scream behind closed doors, it's all seen. Not by the poets, not by the priests, but by the ones holding the washcloths. You step from the hush of courtly whispers into the thick silence beneath many layers of fabric layers that move with a slow, swaying weight. You're following a royal woman again, only this time you're closer than ever. Beneath the skirts, beneath the decorum, right down to the darkest, most unspoken realm of hygiene menstrual management. There are no shelves of modern products here. No cotton, no plastic, no adhesive strips, no neat little tampons with pastel wrappers. What you find instead is improvisation woven into ritual necessity, dressed up as tradition. And at the center of it all, a question: how did royal women deal with their periods really? Tonight you find out. You're in a 14th century chamber sitting on the edge of a padded stool beside a noblewoman who doesn't meet your gaze. She's already bled through her chemise. You can see the faint blooming stain on the underside of her linen underskirt. But she doesn't panic. She doesn't cry. She lifts herself carefully, gingerly, and lets her maid reach beneath the layers of wool and silk to to pull away the soaked cloth. Yes, cloth. Menstrual rags were just that, strips of absorbent linen folded and refolded, sometimes tied in place with laces or belts. They were washed, dried, reused. Some women, particularly in Northern Europe, used wool woven into pads or even felted and softened by hand. In winter, these stayed warm. In summer, they steamed. Either way, they were bulky, and they were often visible. A young maid now washes the bloodied cloth in a bucket of snowmelt and lye soap. She does it with the precision of someone who has done this every month since her own flowering. The cloth is wrung out, dried beside the hearth, then folded and tucked away into a cedar wood drawer, along with 5 or 6 others, all bearing the faint watermark of womanhood. But there are other methods. You kneel beside a Venetian lady who prefers the sponge method, a small sea sponge ball softened in vinegar or wine trimmed to fit and inserted high enough to sit discreetly inside the vaginal canal. It's clever, it's ancient, and it's messy. The sponge must be removed and rinsed at intervals. Not easy in a world where toilets are holes in floors and privacy is a luxury. Sometimes it's forgotten. Sometimes it's left too long. One physician writes in 1532 of a baroness who left hers in for 3 days and developed a fever. The diagnosis, a trapped lunar sponge. You try not to picture it. And for some women, nothing. They simply bled into their undergarments, or into the layers themselves. In certain Slavic courts, menstruating noblewomen wore a dedicated mooning chemise made from thicker linen with an extra panel at the seat. When stained, it was not washed, but burned in ritual fire. You watch a servant drop a bundle of scorched fabric into a hearth, whispering a phrase you don't recognize. Her fingers are blistered from the tongs. Fringe fact: in late medieval Spain, there are records of noblewomen placing rosemary-stuffed parchment in their undergarments to sweeten the flow. You find one now folded like a fan, soaked with red smelling of crushed herbs and iron. It's strangely beautiful and unspeakably intimate. But not all rituals were about absorption. Some were about protection. In France, royal women often wore menstrual girdles, soft belts of silk or leather with a pouch that held folded cloth in place. These were fastened with metal buckles or even silver pins. Some were inscribed with prayers. One queen wore hers engraved with the Latin phrase, "Non me tangus sanguis reginae." Touch me not the blood of a queen. And even here, hygiene was secondary to symbolism. Because menstruation wasn't just a physical event. It was power, or danger, or both. You hear the whispers? She bled through her chair at supper. The maid caught her stain on the sheets. She washed too little, now the smell is upon her. Yes, the smell. It mattered. A lot. Women used sachets of lavender and rosemary tucked beneath their skirts to mask odor. Some dabbed cloves or crushed sage onto the cloth itself. You see one servant boiling rose petals into vinegar, then soaking the cloths before wringing them dry. It doesn't remove the smell. It just gives it a different name. And always there was shame. Menstruating women often retreated into silence. Some were excused from court. Others weren't. One duchess, you observe, kneels beside the queen during mass blood, silently threading its way through her stockings. She can't move. To rise would reveal it. To speak would admit it. She simply stares ahead, mouth tight, and endures. And the queen, she notices, and gently places her cloak across the girl's lap. Not kindness, solidarity. Historians still argue whether royal women internalized shame or resisted it. Diaries are rare, records are vague. But in one remarkable letter, a 16th century German countess writes, "My blood came early. I was glad. It meant I had not sinned." Another writes more bitterly, "Each month I offer my body to silence, and sometimes silence breaks." One evening you overhear a maid hissing to another, "She is late, she is late. She has not bled since the feast of the Assumption." The other maid crosses herself. The implication is clear. No blood means pregnancy, or illness, or punishment. All three are terrifying. And so the cycle goes. The cloths are folded, the girdles buckled, the blood washed out of sheets. And beneath layers of silk and formality, queens and duchesses and princesses walk through the halls, knowing their bodies are speaking loudly, even if no one will say the words aloud. You leave the chamber with a strange reverence, not for the discomfort, not for the awkwardness, but for the sheer quiet durability of it all. Because through all the superstition, all the secrecy, all the muttered myths and hidden stains, royal women still stood tall, still ruled, still bled. And no crown could protect them from it. It's night again, and the fire in the hearth has burned low, but the room is still thick with the warmth of too many bodies and not enough ventilation. You're in a royal bedchamber, not for slumber this time, but for something far more consequential. A wedding night. The guests have left. The musicians have packed away their lutes. The great feast is a memory now, and all eyes figuratively, but sometimes quite literally, are on the young royal couple cloistered behind heavy curtains. And while the groom paces nervously, you turn your gaze to the bride who is being prepared by her women. She has been bathed rare for the week, perfumed, powdered, even dressed again in fresh linens. But this isn't about beauty. It's about proof. Because the consummation of a royal marriage isn't just about romance or even reproduction. It's about witnessing the event, inspecting the results, and verifying that the union is now officially binding. And the primary evidence, a stained sheet. You watch as a lady-in-waiting unrolls a pristine white cloth onto the bed, smoothing it gently like the canvas for a deeply intimate painting yet to come. This is the test cloth, and by morning it will either be triumphantly displayed or quietly burned. No pressure, right? Your bride sits silently while her chambermaids dab behind her ears with a cologne of myrtle and bergamot. It won't help the nerves. Nothing will. The air is thick with tension and something else, expectation, and a quiet but unmistakable sense of assessment. Her body is about to become a public matter. You hear the whispers through the walls. Is she clean? Is she pure? Does she know what to do? Spoiler, most didn't. Especially the noble girls married off at 13 or 15. You recall the story of a Spanish infanta who asked if she was meant to remove her shift before lying beside her husband. The answer was a scandal in 3 countries. And what of the groom? He's been advised by a physician, a confessor, and possibly an old soldier with a glass of wine. Whether he knows more than hearsay is questionable. But his role tonight is simpler perform. Meanwhile, the bride's body is being studied. Every wrinkle, every breath, every tremble. Because it's not just about doing it, it's about bleeding. Here's your fringe fact: in certain medieval and early modern courts, the presence of virginal blood on the sheets was considered not just proof of consummation, but proof of chastity. No stain, no honor. In one Prussian court, midwives were brought in the next morning to verify blood presence, and sometimes to stage it using drops of chicken blood on command. Historians still argue how widespread that practice really was, but enough accounts survive to make you wonder how many sheets were ever honest. Back to our bride. She lies down. The room clears. The candles are snuffed low. What happens next is veiled by shadow, by silence, by expectation. But by morning, you see the results. The maid carries out the cloth arms, stiff face blank. She lays it on a silver tray. The stain is faint but visible. A nobleman declares it satisfactory. The Queen Mother pretends not to smile. But sometimes there is no stain. And that's where it gets dangerous. You're now in the room of a duchess who has just endured a consummation with no proof. Her husband swears it occurred. She insists she bled, but the cloth clean. The next morning, she is summoned before a tribunal of advisors. A physician inspects her. Yes, inspects. He declares her possibly virginal, possibly barren, possibly deceptive. She cries. Her marriage is annulled 3 weeks later. You follow the aftermath as it echoes through corridors. Maids whisper. Ladies turn away at court. Her reputation dissolves faster than perfume on silk, all because of an absent bloodstain. Other women take precautions. Some discreetly pierce their thighs or fingers before lying down, ensuring a spot of blood makes it to the linen. Others rely on their maids, loyal, resourceful, who stash a vial of animal blood in a pocket just in case. You find one such maid in the kitchens, rinsing out a cloth in water, darkened by something that never came from the bride. Because in the court, the appearance of purity outweighs the truth. And what of smell? What of bodily evidence beyond the sheet? Some grooms report their new brides had a holy fragrance, thanks to sachets sewn discreetly into the bodice or placed beneath the pillow. These little bundles contain dried rose petals, cinnamon bark, and a hint of civet. One such pillow now lies crumpled on a chair, its stuffing scented and faintly damp from the night's events. But not all marriages end in blood and secrecy. One French princess was so young and small that she was declared unfit for consummation. The marriage was postponed for 2 years. When the act finally occurred, the blood was real, but the bride was hospitalized with fever for a week. Her sheets were paraded like war trophies, and still these nights continued. Because royal marriage wasn't about love, it was about legitimacy, dynasty, inheritance. A single stain held the weight of borders, alliances, wars. You read an account of a Habsburg marriage where a doctor and 2 court officials stood outside the bedchamber door listening for sounds, for proof. And when there was none, the door was opened. The couple was told to try again. Royal intimacy was not intimate, it was watched. So tonight, as you pull back your own clean sheets untouched by scrutiny, you remember her, the trembling girl lying on starched linen, not knowing whether to hope for pain or hope for nothing. Because for royal women, privacy ended at the marriage bed, and their blood became public currency. The bells of the abbey toll low and slow, and the atmosphere shifts. You step out of the perfumed haze of royal bedrooms and into the shadowed hush of velvet-draped corridors, where voices are softened, footsteps light, and all eyes are downcast. Someone has died. A queen. And death for royal women wasn't the end of hygiene. It was the final ritual in a lifelong performance of it. A closing act with its own strange rules, silent tasks, and private degradations that no crown could protect you from. Tonight, you're not just witnessing royal hygiene. You're witnessing royal decomposition dressed in silk and incense. The queen lies on her deathbed, her skin waxen, her lips painted a faint rose. Her hands are crossed delicately over her abdomen, fingers already stiffening. But it's not mourning you smell, it's something else. Under the flowers and incense, sweat bile, and the first hints of rot. You turn as the chambermaids enter, their aprons, clean faces, unreadable. They've done this before. They move with rehearsed precision, lifting the cooling body gently, beginning the laying out process. They do not speak. The room is sacred now. Step 1, cleansing. Despite the fact that her body has stopped working, tradition demands a final washing. A mixture of rose water, vinegar, and wine is prepared. It is warm not for her comfort, but for pliability. The body must remain supple for dressing, for viewing, for painting if necessary. You watch as her limbs are gently washed, face, neck, hands, between her thighs. No part is spared. Even in death, she must be immaculate. Here's your fringe fact. In some royal households, the post-mortem washing was performed by women of noble birth. In others, only low-ranking servants were permitted, lest a noblewoman become ritually unclean. You witness a curious compromise here. A countess oversees the washing, but never touches. A maid scrubs with red fingers. Both pretend the other is invisible. Then comes sealing. Cotton or wool is gently placed in every opening mouth, nostrils, ears, and elsewhere. For scent, for modesty, for containment. You look away as the maid performs her task. The queen is still being preserved, shaped, managed even now. And next, binding. The body is wrapped first in linen, then in silk. The underlayers are scented with herbs. Myrtle, sage, mint, crushed cloves. All to delay the inevitable. But it's a losing battle. Royal corpses decompose just like any other. Historians still argue whether it was more out of respect or superstition that royal women were bathed and scented in death. Some suggest it was for viewing. Others say it was to prevent the soul from being trapped in filth. Either way, the process is meticulous. One maid oils the queen's hair and gently braids it, tucking violets between the strands. Another powders her cheeks, not white this time, but with a tint of warmth to mimic life. You see it in her final expression, not beauty, but arranged absence. You watch as the royal physician enters. He places a hand on her shoulder. He whispers a prayer. Then oddly, he records the weight of the body, the color of the tongue, the state of the gums. Why? Because even in death, the queen's body is evidence. There's a second body nearby, one you weren't expecting. It's the queen's maid who died 3 days earlier. Typhus, unwashed, buried in haste. No incense, no linens, no braiding. 2 bodies, 2 deaths. 2 very different farewells. You follow the preparations for the funeral. The queen's corpse is transported in a coffin lined with lead, not just for status, but to trap smell. You overhear a priest mutter about the sour vapor of queens. One servant drops a pouch of dried oranges into the coffin. Not tradition, just compassion. Later that night, you find yourself alone in the queen's dressing room. Her comb is still there, flecked with gray hair. Her last undergarments, still warm with body heat only hours ago, have been folded and placed in a basket. They'll be burned. Not for cleanliness, for privacy. Because if her blood was sacred in life, her stains are dangerous in death. One particularly haunting tradition. After a queen's death, her toiletries were sometimes locked away or gifted to convents. Her perfumes, creams, even her linens vanished from court. Not out of reverence, out of fear. Fear of lingering essence. Fear that the scent might confuse the newborn queen's aura. Fear that ghosts remember smells. And that brings you to the final silent act, scenting the room. After the body is removed, the entire chamber is fumigated with burning rosemary and laurel. Not just for the stink, for soul cleansing. You cough as the smoke fills the room. Your eyes water. The chambermaid bows her head and whispers, "It is done." And just like that, the room resets. A new queen will take this space soon. A new body, a new perfume, a new set of monthly bloodstains to soak from the sheets. The bedchamber has memory. The rushes are changed, the bedding replaced. But the air, if you breathe deeply, still carries a trace of clove sweat and the final sigh of someone who was never truly alone. Tonight, as you settle into your own bed, clean and untouched by legacy, remember, even queens must be washed after death. Even monarchs decay beneath their muslin, and even in silence their bodies whisper, "I was real. I bled. I ended." The morning bells have barely stopped tolling, but court never really pauses. As the body of one queen cools, another young royal is being fitted into the vacuum she left behind. The throne doesn't mourn, it simply reshuffles its silks. And now, in the glow of fresh candlelight and fresh expectation, you find yourself back at the beginning, inside the gilded nursery of a royal girl child. Tonight, we explore a seldom asked question. How were royal girls raised into the world of courtly hygiene? Because if queens were expected to smell like roses and bleed like saints, their daughters had to be trained in it early, long before they even understood what all the fuss was about. You watch as a nursemaid lifts a toddler princess onto a low stool. She's already dressed in a miniature version of court attire, stiff bodice, layered skirts, and under it all a linen shift lined with soft lace to protect delicate skin. But even now the expectations are clear. The bath is ready, not a proper soak, but a wiping ritual. A basin of warm milk and chamomile water is placed beside the stool. The nursemaid dips a cloth, wrings it out, and begins to dab behind the ears, beneath the arms, and between the thighs. The child giggles. She doesn't know this is practice, rehearsal, a performance that will last a lifetime. Royal daughters were not born into comfort. They were born into scrutiny. Every rash, every mole, every unpleasant smell was observed, noted, and in some cases reported to royal physicians, men who would sometimes inspect a girl's bowel movements or weigh her used linens as if divining her future from the most intimate signs. Fringe fact: in some early modern courts, girls as young as 5 were fitted with soft, wax-scented pads during their first signs of development, not for protection, but to train them to tolerate the feeling of cloth between their legs. Preparing for womanhood, the nurses called it. Preparing for politics, more like. You're now watching a 7-year-old being instructed on how to stand for her morning toilette. She lifts her arms, turns slowly, allows her maid to comb her hair and dust her shoulders with lavender chalk. Not a speck of powder lands without intent. This is etiquette by way of skin care. At 9, she is taught how to recognize when her undergarments smell wrong. The standard A mix of lavender sachet and soapstone. Anything else, a whiff of urine, the sour scent of an unwashed night, results in correction. At 10, she is shown how to fold a menstrual cloth. Not for use, just for understanding. She practices folding it, soaking it in rose water, and placing it inside a muslin pouch with a wax seal. This pouch will sit in her wardrobe until she's ready, or rather until her body decides she is. And always there are lessons. So many lessons. A tutor tells her not to walk barefoot on stone the womb pulls downward through the soles. A nurse tells her to never laugh too hard. While bleeding, the blood may go wrong. A chaplain suggests bathing during menstruation might invite improper thoughts. She nods. She writes it down. Historians still argue whether these teachings were consistent or varied wildly by region, rank, or religion. But one thing is consistent: control of the body was control of reputation. And for royal girls, that control had to be learned as early as grammar and posture. You now sit with a 13-year-old princess on her first blood day. Her maid spotted it early on the cloth she discarded without thought. The maid didn't panic. She simply drew the curtain, whispered the news, and began preparing the ritual, a small cake of beeswax. And rosemary burned in the fireplace, a bowl of red wine placed at the bedside, and a new belt, a woman's girdle laid out with embroidered initials. The princess doesn't cry. She was told this would happen. She was told it would hurt a little, that she might feel dizzy, that she might be overcome with the weight of her womb. But no one told her she would feel different. Unclean. Watched. Waited. A note is written to her mother. She has begun. That's all it says. Tomorrow the queen will bring her a necklace, a token of passage. But tonight the girl lies still wide-eyed with a folded rag between her legs and 1,000 new expectations between her ears. Later, you watch her walking the halls with straighter shoulders. The other girls nod. The boys pretend not to notice, but they've been told. The priest includes her in a new prayer. And in the back of the nursery wing, younger girls whisper, "Has she done the cloth yet? Do you think she bled much? Will she marry now?" Because menstruation wasn't just a sign of fertility. It was a clock. It ticked toward engagement, marriage, and production of heirs. The second the cloth was stained, the game changed. And not every girl made it through unscathed. One poor princess, sickly from birth, never bled. At 16, she was examined, yes, examined by royal midwives and declared hollow. Her marriage contract was broken. She was sent to a convent with a dowry and no name. The scandal was hushed. But her chambermaid, the one who changed her linens for years, still cried for her. So now when you glance into these royal nurseries and see the gentle brushing, the scented oils, the soft hands pressing linen against tender skin, know this, it isn't pampering. It's grooming. For a lifetime of curated filth, silenced pain, and unspoken standards. Every girl born into court learns it. Not just how to smile and wave, but how to bleed quietly, how to smell right, how to hide. You feel the temperature drop a few degrees as you pass through the stone archway, cold air rising from below. This isn't the main hall or a royal chamber or even one of those perfumed dressing rooms. You're entering a place few mention and fewer still would ever choose to describe the toilet rooms of the Tudors. Yes, those Tudors. The dynasty that gave us 6 wives, 2 beheadings, a golden age, and at least one monarch who may have literally exploded in his coffin. But tonight, you're not among legends. You're standing above a garderobe, a narrow wooden seat with a hole cut into it, perched like a throne over a pit deep below. The air smells of old stone ash and something unmistakably human. Because here's the thing, no portrait shows even royal bottoms had to go somewhere. And that somewhere, it was often a drafty cubicle shared by dozens of members of the royal household, positioned directly above a cesspit or running moat. Sometimes there were curtains, sometimes not. You pause as a noblewoman lifts her skirts, layers of linen, wool, silk, and shame, and settles carefully onto the worn oak seat. It's icy to the touch. She flinches. No one speaks. The chambermaid behind her remains, still eyes averted. This is Hygiene, Tudor-style, cold, communal, and crudely functional. Now let's take a quick step back and picture the palace. Hampton Court, a marvel of Renaissance architecture. Over 1,000 courtiers, just over 30 toilets, that's it. The rest, chamber pots, outdoor latrines, and the occasional secret stool, which, by the way, isn't actually secret. It's just discreet. As discreet as you can be while squatting behind a tapestry with a footman holding a lavender-scented cloth nearby. Tonight's fringe fact: Henry VIII had a personal groom of the stool, a nobleman appointed specifically to help him manage his bathroom needs. His job included wiping, inspecting, and keeping notes. Imagine the power dynamics of that arrangement. And while men had their awkward rituals, royal women had something arguably worse: the expectation of invisibility. You step inside a closet attached to Queen Elizabeth I's chambers. It's tiny, no window. Just a carved bench with a hole, a ceramic pot beneath, and a curtain drawn across the doorway. The Queen, famous for her intelligence and political prowess, had to relieve herself in a chair that funneled her business into a stinking container emptied by servants with buckets. Those buckets, by the way, often dumped directly into the Thames. It gets better. In winter, the contents would freeze. In summer, they'd ferment. The stench wasn't theoretical, it was palpable. And perfume could only do so much, which is why toilets weren't always inside the room. Sometimes they were down a corridor past 2 staircases and around a corner away from the royal nose. And yet, they were never far enough. You're now walking the gallery with a duchess who's been holding it for hours because she can't find a moment alone. Her gowns are so tight, she needs help just to squat. And the privacy illusion. Even a queen had at least one woman stationed nearby to hand her cloth water or the ever-dignified bouquet of herbs to sniff against the smell. Cloth, you say, yes. Because toilet paper did not exist. Instead, royal women used bits of linen washed and reused moss hay, or if they were very lucky, fine wool cloths dampened with vinegar. These were stored in small wooden boxes near the toilet, or handed off to a maid for cleaning. You see one such box now, its contents neatly folded, the top dusted with rose petals. It smells faintly of mildew and dignity. Sometimes they wiped, sometimes they just dripped, and sometimes, well, they didn't do anything at all. Historians still argue whether the royal garderobes were actually cleaner than their chamber pots. Some say the rush of water beneath the palace flowing from diverted rivers carried waste away. Others insist the sewage just collected and festered breeding disease and drawing rats the size of corgis. What we do know is that aromatic herbs were stuffed into nearly every crevice of Tudor bathrooms. Lavender, sage, rosemary tied into bundles and hung from the ceiling, stuffed into wall cracks, even burned like incense. You catch a maid doing just that now, wafting a cloud of rosemary smoke toward the Queen's private close stool, muttering a quiet apology to the air. Royal stools themselves could be lavish. Some were padded, covered in velvet, embroidered with family crests. The contrast is surreal, a silk-covered chair with golden tassels, and a bucket of human waste beneath. And when nature struck at awkward moments, you'd be surprised how often royal women simply used a chamber pot behind a curtain during banquets, aided by silent, practiced hands. The pot would be emptied discreetly. Perfume would be sprayed. The Queen would return to the table, her plate still warm. There were even portable stools, travel versions of the royal toilet carried by valets or page boys in procession. One such throne was found in an English collection, velvet-lined mahogany, with a lid carved in the shape of a lion's face. Fierce, functional, filthy. And let's not forget accidents. One account describes a visiting duchess at court who soiled herself during a royal audience. The stench gave her away. She was escorted out and never invited back. Another woman was rumored to have lost her position after dropping her chamber pot's contents onto the head of a footman standing below. She swore it was an accident. No one believed her. You sit now in the stillness of a Tudor hallway, the echoes of footsteps gone. Somewhere below, a servant is emptying yet another pot. The palace may gleam with candlelight and satin, but down here it smells of ash, rot, and reality. Because no matter how rich the robes, no matter how powerful the crown, one truth always held: everyone poops. But only a queen did it in velvet. You pull back the curtain, expecting sunlight and polished silver. But the scent hits you first. Not sewage, not sweat, but something floral, fresh, and faintly deceptive. You're in the 20th century now, the era of cameras, telegrams, and automobiles. The corsets have softened. The chamber pots are mostly gone. But as you step into the palace of a modern monarch, you realize something surprising: the perfume is still doing the heavy lifting. Tonight, you tiptoe through the polished floors of early modern royal homes, Edwardian, Victorian, even post-war. You might expect gleaming tiles, clawfoot tubs, and spotless linens. And yes, the plumbing is better. The soaps are finer. The powder puffs are fluffier. But the old habits, they cling like moths to brocade. You're now in the personal dressing suite of Queen Mary of Teck, grandmother to the late Queen Elizabeth II. She's seated at her mirrored vanity, surrounded by an army of jars, brushes, and perfume bottles, each labeled in gold script. The air is thick with rose attar, orris root, and the ever-present powder of rice starch and violet. She bathes once a week, sometimes daily bathing not yet expected. Even into the 1920s, many royals preferred a brisk wipe down with a flannel cloth usually infused with cologne or vinegar water. The phrase bird bath wasn't coined for pigeons, you know. You catch a maid squeezing a dampened linen over the queen's arms, careful not to disturb her lace cuffs. The cloth is warm, clean, and smells of lemon verbena. But it's not soap, just ritual. The queen's undergarments boiled, starched, scented, but changed only twice a week unless she was unwell. Her handkerchiefs, dozens per day, spritzed with scent to distract from breath that might not have seen a toothbrush since breakfast, or even the day before. And then there's the hair. You lift a curl gently, of course. It's stiff with setting lotion, a floral alcohol solution that masks oil and holds shape. Real shampooing, maybe once every 10 days. Dry shampoo, rice powder, and talc was far more common. The white residue dusts the scalp like sugar over marzipan. Pretty from a distance, gritty up close. Here's your fringe fact. Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, reportedly kept a private perfume cabinet with over 60 bottles, each designated for a different body part. One for ankles, one for gloves, one for nape of neck, not for cleanliness, for control. Because even in the 20th century, scent meant status, and the nose remembers. You walk now beside a young royal in the 1940s, her shoes polished, her gloves pristine. Her skin beneath the cream is breaking out from layers of cold cream pan-stick makeup and unwashed pores. She was told to dab, not scrub. Water makes you coarse. Cleanliness, even now, is cosmetic before it's hygienic. She dabs a bit of rose water behind her ears, just like her grandmother did. Modernity comes slowly. Yes, plumbing had improved. Royals in the 1930s had flush toilets. Some even had built-in bidets imported from France. But the stigma of talking about hygiene still airtight. You'll never hear a royal mention deodorant or ask for a toothbrush aloud. And even in the swinging 60s, some things hadn't swung that far. You read a report hidden deep in royal housekeeping records that one palace maid was dismissed for mentioning a sanitary napkin in earshot of a visiting dignitary. That was 1967. The napkins themselves, modern, yes. But royal women often preferred reusable cloth pads into the 1950s, tucked into special drawers marked discreetly with ribbon. Tampons were unladylike. The body was not to be entered. Historians still debate whether Queen Elizabeth II ever fully adopted disposable menstrual products during her early reign. But one thing is agreed. Her ladies-in-waiting handled everything from tracking cycles to packing linens for travel. One former valet recalled that every tour included a mystery case, lined in blue satin, always kept locked. No one asked. Everyone knew. And for all the modern trappings, even the bathing ritual retained its formality. A maid would draw the bath, check the temperature, add milk powder or flower oils, lay out the towels in precise order. The queen or princess or duchess would bathe not in solitude, but with a valet stationed just beyond the door, listening for cues. You'd think by now that hygiene would be private, but royalty never got that luxury. Even Princess Diana, decades later, had her makeup table documented in press reports, its powders, brushes, and perfumes dissected as if they were military gear. Her perfume, Quelques Fleurs, was a signature. Its scent followed her like a shadow, because cleanliness for royal women had never been about actual sanitation. It was a scent trail, a story. You walk now through a palace hallway in the 1980s. The cleaning crew arrives with spray bottles of disinfectant, vacuum carts, floral air fresheners. The rooms smell like a department store, but behind one closed door, a duchess is brushing powder into her hair, just as her great-grandmother once did. No cameras, no stylists, just habit. Somewhere in the drawer, a satin pouch of rose-scented wipes for freshening up. No one talks about it, because even in modern times, the myth survives that royal women wake up clean, fragrant, smooth, that their skin glows without effort, that they never sweat, never bleed, never smell. And so they powder, they spray, they smile. Even now, you linger now in the half-lit hush of a private suite somewhere behind glass walls and velvet ropes, where the public isn't allowed, and where secrets hang like dust motes in the air. No grand staircase, no trumpets, just the faint scent of talcum and silence. This is now a present-day royal household. And if you thought things had changed completely, if you imagined that modern queens and princesses wake with eucalyptus facials and voice-controlled steam showers, you're not entirely wrong. But you're not entirely right either. Because beneath the touchscreen panels and spa-grade exfoliators, the rituals endure. Here the past hasn't vanished. It's been rebranded. You're inside the ensuite bathroom of a modern royal. Its sleek, yes, white marble brass fixtures, backlit mirrors with soft diffusion settings, perfect for morning selfies if those were allowed. The bath is drawn not by hand, but by programmed temperature memory. Lavender oil poured by a dispenser shaped like a swan. But on the counter, a jar of cream that smells like violets and vinegar. A monogrammed brush missing a few bristles. A ceramic pot labeled evening powder. Old habits, slick packaging. Tonight's royal bath isn't about getting clean. It's a ritual of calming. The skin is exfoliated with natural loofah. The face is masked with clay from French volcanic ash. The water is not too hot, it can flush the skin. The towel, Egyptian cotton, embroidered, pressed, still delivered by staff wearing gloves. You'd think by now she'd do this herself, but no. The illusion of sovereignty extends to the illusion of effortlessness. She's powdered, perfumed, deodorized with custom-blended oils. Her undergarments are folded by hand. Her pads not bought in shops are delivered through a private medical courier. Discreet packaging, eco-friendly, unbranded, and the menstruation protocol still quietly coded. When she's on her cycle, the wardrobe staff adjusts colors. Fewer whites, more forgiving silhouettes. Hot water bottles hidden in handbag compartments. One palace assistant keeps a tiny vial of peppermint oil on hand in case of faintness. You see it now being dabbed behind her ears and the waist. Every item used, cloth wipe, liner, swab, is sealed, not tossed, tracked, catalogued, not for conspiracy theories, for privacy. In royal households, even bodily refuse is treated as sensitive material. You watch her dressing. The gown looks effortless. It's not. Underneath is a breathable bodysuit lined with moisture-wicking fabric, seamless, discreet, still tight enough to press the ribs slightly. Remember corsets? They never left. They just learned new names. She checks her skin in the mirror, a faint blemish near her temple. One dab of concealer, and she's radiant again. Effortless, unbothered. But you know better. You saw the bloating, You saw the nausea. You saw her lay curled under silk throws with a heating pad beneath her lower belly, staring at the ceiling, whispering that she wished it would just hurry up and bleed already. Because yes, even now the schedule matters. Royal calendars don't wait for PMS. State dinners do not delay for cramps. So she moves, composed, quiet, perfect. There's still a maid, though she calls herself a stylist now. There's still a lady's assistant, though she carries tablets and pain patches instead of rosewater. The names are modern, the roles are not, and the scent you inhale carefully. Underneath the fresh, the floral, the luxury brand citrus mist, you still catch it. The bass note, that unmistakable scent of worn skin, fatigue, and time. She carries it like all the women before her, only now it's layered beneath packaging. You're reminded of that 18th century duchess who sat in silence while her maid sponged her thighs with vinegar and crushed mint. That Habsburg archduchess who bled through her bed linens in secret. That queen who had her last rags burned in the hearth while the servants whispered prayers. And now here, this woman with the world watching, still battling the same old truth: the crown may change. The throne may be digital. The palace may gleam with modernity. But the body remembers. It sweats, it bleeds, it breaks down, and it hides, just like it always did. And now, as she takes one last look in the mirror and steps into the spotlight, you realize something else. No one out there will ever know that beneath the gown is a discreet cloth liner. No one will hear the soft crinkle when she sits. No one will smell the peppermint oil behind her ear. But it's there. The hygiene never left the story. It just got quieter. So now let your eyes grow heavy and take a deep breath. You followed them, those women of velvet and vinegar, of blood and powder, through centuries of silence. From the stone garderobes of medieval queens to the climate-controlled dressing rooms of modern duchesses, you've traced the hidden rituals they were never meant to explain. The lavender-stuffed corsets, the sponge tucked with trembling fingers, the perfumed cloth held between thighs in the dark. And though time marched on through plagues and powder rooms, through flushing toilets and televised crowns, the truth never changed. Royalty was never truly clean, just carefully, delicately arranged. You now know what lived beneath the silks, what soaked through the linens, what was whispered in corridors and washed in icy basins by hands that history never named. So tonight, as you lie still listening to the soft hum of your own breath, remember this: even queens had stains. Even princesses itched. Even the most perfumed women carried secrets inside their sleeves. It was never just elegance. It was endurance. Quiet, fragrant, bloody endurance. Now close your eyes. Let the velvet fall. Let the powdered shadows of the past slip into silence. You've seen what they never showed you, and now you can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.